Hello everyone, welcome to the What If Anime YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into an exciting new story that will take your imagination to the next level. Let's get started. What if Naruto was the Fireborn dragon of Westeros? Here is short summary. Mounting massive winged, fire-spitting dragons, the Valyrian freehold was at the pinnacle of power and might, standing alone at the top without equal. Until it wasn't. The doom burnt it all. The survivors forgot the greatness of their ancestry. Until Naruto Targaryen, the demon prince, was born. Let's begin the story. Over 1,000 lords were gathered in the great chamber of Harrenhal before the king and his descendants. The Great Council, it was called, and rightfully so, for they were to decide an heir for the Iron Throne. He had ruled over these 1,000 lords and their people for 60 long years, an era many considered to be the peak of the Targaryen dynasty, an era of peace, prosperity and development. But his time was over. Sadly, his heirs, his sons, were both deceased before he had the time to name them heirs to the throne. He was left with his grandsons and granddaughters to choose from. Thus, the Great Council. Jaehaerys I Targaryen was anything but a fool. He knew that while his reign was long and peaceful, every rise must be equally met with downfall. He was all too aware of what awaited his family if he chose the wrong person to sit on the throne. One move could push the House of Dragons into a civil war the likes of which may never be seen again. On one side, Rhaenys, a mature woman of stern disposition with the sinful endowments befitting a Targaryen maiden, his eldest descendant, granddaughter and wife of Esser Corlys Velaryon, had a strong claim to the throne, for she was the oldest among the heirs. On other side, Viserys, his eldest grandson, a rather unimpressive man with an inwardly meek hint to his personality, stood ready to assume the role. 60 years of ruling had taught him to read people like an open book. He knew the direction of the wind within the hall. None favored Rhaenys, for she was a woman. No female has ever sat on the throne, a fact that he feared would haunt his family for the foreseeable future. While his granddaughter was discarded as a choice for his heir, he feared that Viserys' meek demeanor may not be in favor of his rule. No king shall possess the personality his eldest grandson had. He had long since considered both possibilities, which is why he had called for the lords to gather to decide themselves who they wanted on the throne, so that the decision was unanimous. The council knew what the king was trying to do. Everyone knew it. Weary, old eyes peered over the crowd in contemplation, scanning through the different faces one by one with a neutral expression. The king could feel his lips twitching up to form a hint of a smile when his eyes focused on one particular face at the farthest corner of the hall. Sharp, fierce and cold violet eyes stared back at him. He could understand the annoyance behind those eyes. After all, the owner knew very well who was going to be chosen, even if said person had no traits befitting that of a king. Heart heavy with guilt and foreboding, Jaehaerys reached for the scroll destined to decide the fate of his legacy. A scroll that contained the chosen heir by the gathered lords. A scroll that could probably estrange his already cracked family line. Looking at the name inscribed on the cloth, the old king sighed inwardly and gave his knowing granddaughter a look of sympathy, before turning to the only person in the hall who truly mattered, the young man standing behind the crowd. Old tired eyes met cold violet orbs. Jaehaerys readied himself to announce the name. It is declared by all lords paramount and lord vassals of the 7 kingdoms that Prince Viserys Targaryen be made Prince of Dragonstone. The reactions were evident. A wave of gasps went through the crowd, followed by rounds of applause and cheers as Viserys hugged his pregnant sister, wife, in celebration. To his right, his granddaughter was not feeling festive. Why would she? She was denied her birthright simply because she was a woman. But if he was honest with himself, he did not care about the festivities around him, eyes focused on the retreating figure of the one family member he so dearly loved. His youngest grandson, King's Quarters Harrenhal. The prince is here, your grace. Jaehaerys gestured with a neutral look, and the servant immediately opened the gate for a tall, imposing young man to enter with the swag of a predator, his silver hair much more pronounced and radiant than normal. Dressed in a simple black coat with gold ornaments and a large engravement of the Targaryen symbol at the back. Tall, imposing, heavy presence and a muscular body to match. The old king almost chuckled mirthlessly at the irony of the situation. A man who so strongly represented the dragon's blood within their veins was denied the right to sit on thrones simply because he was born a few years later than his brother. Grandfather, come Naruto, join me. The old king took a seat on one of the many chairs within his chamber and gestured for a seat before him, urging his stern grandson to sit. The young prince sat with a nod. His youngest grandson, Naruto Targaryen, the rogue prince, demon prince and many more to either acknowledge his position or the ruthlessness behind the kind demeanor. A sturdy, strong and stern young man with the characteristic silver hair and violet eyes of Targaryen descent, except his silver locks had a reddish sheen to it. A man of unrivaled potential, woven from the fabric of both good and bad. He was the physical embodiment of balance between good and evil. Ruthless, sadistic, precise with a tactical mind, but he was also one of the kindest souls within the kingdom. He valued family and friends above all else. Exactly the kind of qualities a king should have, which was why the next decision he was going to make would weigh heavy on his heart until the end of his days. You were there, I was, and, the old Targaryen pressed on with a soft smile, knowing full well what the silver-haired prince was trying to do. What do you think? You are the king. Your order shall be enforced, spoken like a true soldier, but it was not the kind of answer Jaehaerys needed. You have no problems with Viserys being named as the heir? The old king looked for any outward reaction to his question. He received none. Viserys is my older brother, your grace, and your chosen heir. I've no objections. Let me rephrase that. You have no problems with a man like Viserys being chosen as the Prince of Dragonstone? Tell me straight what you really think, my boy. Naruto sighed. He is weak, Jaehaerys chuckled amusingly. Not that straight. I love my brother, more than I show, but he is not someone worthy to ascend that throne, the demon prince muttered flatly. He has no ambition, no fire in his veins. Sometimes I wonder if he truly is my brother, for he lacks the dragon's fury. Not all of us have inherited the dragon's blood as strongly as you, my boy, some are more tamed in comparison, the old king countered with a soft smile, eyes full of pride as he looked at the future of his legacy. But he is to be king. Should I worry about you opposing him? As long as he gives me no reason to stand against him, I shall support my brother, Naruto declared idly, words firm and eyes cold. I suppose that's the best I can get out of you, the elderly Targaryen answered with a chuckle as he leaned back into the softness of his chair. A teasing smirk developed on his lips soon after. Now tell me, have any maiden melted your cold heart yet? We do not talk about that, old man. Another thing he forgot to mention. Naruto was easily pissed off when it came to his personal issues, especially romantic life. When he got annoyed, his true personality was shown, a disrespectful brat that he loved to death. Jaehaerys chuckled good-naturedly. Come now, no need for that tone with your elders. I am not telling you. As your king, I command it. As your grandson, I say take your command and shove it. Thwack. God that hurt, you old coot. That is for baiting your elders. The old king pulled his cane back with a harmless smile, leaning back into the chair as he eyed his grumbling grandson. Lucky for you, your grandmother is not here. Lucky for you, Naruto countered with a frown as he rubbed the bump on his head. Grandma would have whopped your old ass for hitting me like that. The wise old man was sheepish enough to accept that fact. Try as he might, he could never get his still young and radiant wife to stop spoiling their grandson. He was not the only one who loved Naruto, his wife loved him more than he could dream of. And that kind of made him even more proud, especially since their marriage was a mere shell after the death of their favorite daughter. Naruto was the only person they both loved now. To see the grandson and grandmother bond so deeply, watching them cuddle like dragon hatchlings, even if Naruto was almost 20 years old now, always warmed his heart. He would always find them cuddled up in a quiet room somewhere in the palace or in the garden, his wife cradling the young boy in her arms like a baby. That tongue will get you in trouble someday, the old king bit back with a smile, not bothered by the words. These arguments were the highlights of his days. Ruling could be such a daunting task. Now off with you, you disrespectful little rascal, I need my sleep. Later, old man, don't die in your sleep. The young prince looked at the weak form of his grandfather with a rarely seen worried expression, well aware that the old man was near his end. This meeting was more to chat with him than get assurance for his support in Viserys' rule. He knew his grandfather. The fact that he was going to lose yet another family member weighed heavy on his heart. The death of his father and uncle was enough torment. He was not yet ready to lose the old man. Gripping the handle of Dark Sister to calm his nerves, Naruto quietly left the room and closed the door without a sound. Turning to the worried servant standing before the door, the young prince narrowed his eyes. "Your life depends on my grandfather's health." He didn't need to explain further as the servant almost spoiled his britches. "And what seems to be bothering my little prince?" A soft, melodiously caring voice echoed across the corridor as the prince walked through, stopping mid-step to address the individual. Along the lavishly decorated corridor leading to the stairs, a buxom and beautiful silver-haired woman with the allure of a woman who had seen more than her fair share of the world stood at the far end. She had a curvaceous and slender hourglass figure with seductive proportions any man would drop dead over from looking at, greatly betraying the innocent way she carried herself with. Clinging to her surprisingly curvy body was a modest silver robe with long sleeves to futilely cover the sinful curves of her endowments. Anyone would be shocked to the Shadowlands if they saw her harmlessly innocent demeanor and the large set of luscious F-cup breasts ready to burst out of her modest dress, still as perky as the day she had reached her prime with no garments to restrain their movements. The split of her robe showcased a considerable amount of creamy legs and accentuated the shocking wideness of her thick hips, sporting an ass that could ruin marriages. With wide hips like those, no wonder she had birthed 13 children. One thing was certain about his family: they were utterly stacked in both departments. Grandmother. His grandmother, Alysanne Targaryen, was an elderly woman of a fair complexion, a high forehead, and high cheekbones, opting to style her silver locks in a neat bun, pulled back and pinned behind her ears, absolutely killing people with a sweet smile and a pleasing voice to match. Targaryen women were said to be ageless, as in the effects of age were barely visible on their forms. Prime example was his grandmother. She was a few years younger than her brother husband, but looked like she was barely past her late 40s. The elderly gilf almost glided towards her downtrodden grandson with a natural sway to the thickness of her wide hips, a small hint of a smile flashing on her lips. "I take it your grandfather wanted a word with you about his decision." The young prince's eyes were all too eagerly focused on the sway on the woman's dancing hips as she approached him. More like assurance. Excuses for why he chose visories. No, my support of his rule. She knew what was truly bothering him and she had all the time to ask him later about it, but right now, she knew exactly what he needed to get his mind off the events of today. "Come to Grandma, baby." By now, the gorgeous elderly Targaryen was standing before her young descendant, fat, meaty, pushing against his wide torso as she opened her arms and wrapped them around his head, before pulling him straight to her pouty lips for a hungry. The corridors were witness to a sight never seen by human eye and to sounds that should not be made by family members. Schlop, schlop, sloppy, wet sounds of lips devouring each other echoed across the stony hallway, as Naruto pushed his grandmother against the wall and roughly ripped open her robe, much to the gilf's verbal glee, and boldly sank his hands into the massive orbs of tit flesh, still as firm and doughy as ever. If anyone, literally anyone, had stumbled upon the duo, they would have seen the normally innocent and harmless queen of the Targaryen royal family in a rather compromising state of partial undress. Schluck, schluck, robe opened at the front, allowing free access to her fat milk tanks as they were devoured by her hungry grandson while a brazen finger sawed in and out of her cunt. Alysanne's eyes were molded into the shape of a heart as her deprived body melted into her descendant's arms. It would be some time before they realized that they were in the corridors and that anyone could see them lost in their lost, before they retreated into a separate chamber and the stony walls of the bedchamber were witness to the astonishing sight of Naruto, the demon prince, ramming his grandmother's pillowy ass to the edge of the wall while in a mating press position. Next day, bright early morning sunlight streamed into the large bedroom a certain demon prince was occupying, prompting said Silverette to stir from his sleep. Bright violet eyes, glowing like the precious gemstones in the light, opened to scan the surroundings before noticing the extra weight situated upon his. A soft smile tugged at his lips as he idly observed the blissful expression of his grandmother sleeping like an innocent kitten, not an ounce of discomfort or worry on her mature face. Radiant silver hair, normally done in a bun atop her head, were let loose and extended all the way down to the small of her delicate back, a few strands hanging in front of her delicate features. Plump lips were subconsciously stretched into a satisfied smile as she slept atop his chiseled. Planting a soft on the gilf's lips, Naruto moved to stand up from the bed, until a delicate hand was placed on his shoulder and his body pulled back to a naked and fat form. Don't you know it's discourteous to leave bed without ing your lover a good morning? The sleepy queen muttered seductively, hurrying into the prince's ears as she opened her radiant eyes and smiled cheekily. Naruto chuckled. I did you. And who said that is the only place you can? The cheeky gilf asked as she reached around her grandson's waist and boldly grabbed the meaty still wet with their combined juices. Alisan gasped in surprise as Naruto reached behind and jabbed a thick finger up her leaking cunt, pulling it out as soon as it was in as he turned around in her arms and placed his wet finger before her lips. I don't think I can you there. You little rascal, you did that to me, to your own grandmother. Despite herself, the queen couldn't help but blush beet red as she looked between their mashed bodies and noticed her gaping lips utterly drenched in white goo, the sheets ruined by the amount of cum that her little dragon had poured into her. She was silenced as the prince pushed his wet finger into her oral muscles instinctively ing on the invading digit like her life depended on tasting her own nectar, all while her cheeks gave off a red hue. We have to leave for King's Landing this noon, the rogue prince started in a firm tone, trying to get himself free from the busty woman's arms as he removed his finger from her. Grandfather can be a pain in my rear sometimes if I don't present myself before him early. I suppose I have to haste back to Dragonstone as well, not until I take a shower to wash off what you poured into me last night, you little beast, the bottom-heavy gilf purred in a cheerful voice as she stood up, massive globes of tit flesh wobbling with her sudden movement. If you feel the need to join, don't hesitate to do so. There are places I can't quite reach and by the god do they need thorough rubbing. The silverette semi-hard sprung up back into attention when the fat-butted queen stood up from the bed with a seductive chuckle and glided towards the adjacent bathroom door, wide childbirthing hips wobbling the fattest and thickest butt in the Targaryen family. Early evening, Kings Road, Riverlands. A delicate blanket of darkness was slowly but surely moved over the horizon, turning the grassy and green landscapes of the Kings Road almost pitch black as the royal caravan strode towards the capital. They had covered a considerable distance over the course of the day but still far from home. Seated high atop his midnight black steed, covered from head to toe in pitch black armor and dark sister at the ready, Naruto calmly rode through the forest beside the royal carriage, opting to ride beside the carrier instead of sitting inside with the rest. While they had crossed several keeps and holdfasts across the lands, the lords and ladies all too gleeful to house the old king and his family. But Naruto had insisted on moving forward, arguing that lingering unnecessarily could provide bad elements the opportunities to move against the royal family. The royal guards, king's guards and the family was in favor with staying since they were confident that no one would have the guts to attack such a massive caravan and expect to survive. The end decision was still made by the king. Jaehaerys chose to listen to his grandson and ordered to move forward. They did, but now, it was too dark to move forward, leaving no choice but to camp for the night and rest up. Hearing the sounds of hooves striding across the trees, he stopped and raised his hand for the caravan to come to a dead stop. Gripping the handle of his Valyrian sword Lee, the rogue prince narrowed his eyes to see into the darkness as the sounds increased. 3 royal guards strode into the clearing and bowed before the prince as they came near. Prince Naruto, no sightings of any nearby villages or towns several leagues away from our position. As you had suspected, this seems the logical choice to camp for the night. Naruto nodded in approval and he hopped off his stallion and knocked on the door of the carriage. Your Grace, with your command, we will camp here for the night. Proceed. The order was carried out immediately. The caravan spread over the clearing for quite some distance, opting to stay near to the river. Tents were set up promptly, first for the royal family, the lords and ladies of the court. Naruto stayed away from the crowd and his family for the entire night, only appearing among the crowd to fill up his wine bottle and then disappear into the darkness. Jaehaerys tried and failed to get his wayward grandson to join the festivities, but he was refused every time. The court mostly focused on Viserys, for he was the prince of Dragonstone, the future king. It was more like booting. The man soaked it all up like dry sponge, much to the ire of his sister wife. As always, with the queen not there, Naruto remained elusive throughout the feast prepared for the family, much to the old king's resignation. Emma almost pulled her hair from frustration as her brother and father of her child laughed boisterously on the table, probably because of the excess wine in his system. The frustration was mostly because Naruto was not there with them, as always. Her twin brother has always stayed away from them, The most painful part was that he stayed away from her as well after her marriage to Viserys. She felt empty without her twin nearby. It felt like a part of her was missing. It was quite late, but the festivities continued well into the night. Jaehaerys, in his old age, could not keep up with the young generation and excused himself. The old king was escorted to his royal tent by a platoon of Kingsguards. The wise monarch shook his head as he found the missing prince staring into the flaming core of a bonfire before his tent, leaning against the trunk of a tree, obviously waiting for him. "You missed quite a feast," Jaehaerys commented softly, approaching the young Silverette as he stared into the flame without blinking. "I'll live," came the prince's flat response. "How long are you going to keep yourself hidden from your family, my boy?" To be honest, the question terrified him. He had tried his best to keep the estranged boy company, to shower him with the love he and his wife could muster so that he never felt the absence of his deceased parents. But what would happen to him when they were gone? He didn't have much time left to live, and his wife, despite her young and healthy looks, was still almost as old as him. Her superior genes may keep her alive for another 20 to 30 years, but she would still leave him devastated. What if he never found anyone before they were gone? What if he left everything behind and went into self-exile? He had no friends in the capital or anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms, even in his own family, even if his Aunt Rhaenys and twin sister Emma tried their best to keep him company. He would be a stranger within the walls of his own home. He never wanted that for his grandson. Never ever. A frown marred the Silverette's sharp features as he turned to his elder. "Most of those so-called family members call me Demon Prince right to my face." Jaehaerys' eyes widened slightly, understanding the situation immediately. "Not because of who you are, but the power you possess. It's a compliment to your prowess as a warrior. Fearing my power is the same as fearing me." The Kingsguards shifted uncomfortably as Naruto stood up angrily and roared at the calm king, hand instinctively reaching for the handle of Dark Sister. Seeing the calm look on his grandfather's face, the young prince calmed down and bowed slightly. "My apologies, Your Grace." The old king's response was exactly what everyone expected of him. The Targaryen ruler stepped forward and placed a calming hand on his grandson's shoulder, giving it a loving squeeze as he smiled. "Your anger is understandable, but you can rest assured that you are loved by everyone. Give them a chance to show it." The demon prince merely nodded. "Get some rest. We have much distance to cover come the dawn." "Understood." The Silverette responded curtly, gesturing for the Kingsguards before they could get into positions before the king's tent. "All of you, go and guard my brother." "Be but my prince." He was met with a cold glare. "Don't make me repeat myself." The guards looked to the amused king for confirmation, sighing in resignation as said ruler nodded with a smile. They promptly moved away, not wanting to linger any longer. "They have been guarding me for years. I don't trust anyone with your safety." The response, though blunt and very straightforward, warmed his heart as he chuckled loudly, pushing away the flaps of his tent as he strode in. "Good night, my boy, do try to get some sleep." "Night, grandfather." With the king heading inside and the festivities far away from his ears, the estranged prince was left listening to the crackling of woods burning inside the bonfire, his violet eyes drilling into the flames like it was the most interesting wonder of the Seven Kingdoms and beyond. And it was. It called him, appealing to his dragon blood, stirring up dormant urges to get closer and devour the inferno. Having been introduced to the court after the day of the big announcement, a young Alicent Hightower was starting to love the wonders she had seen since her introduction. Being the daughter of the king's hand had its perks and she was enjoying them to the fullest. Her father had introduced her to pretty much every highborn of importance besides the royal family, everyone except the one person she really wanted to see. The young man her mother had specifically told her to seek out and send her regards before she passed away. While she had been devastated by the death of her mother, her last wish had surprised and interested her for sure. Her mother was not one for such messages. She was a rather straightforward and strict woman, dedicated to her duties as Lady of Hightower. It was no secret that her parents did not marry out of love _highborn seldomly did, a fact her father had almost beaten into her head _ they were married out of necessity, but it shocked her to hear that there was a person out there that her beautiful but strict mother actually considered worthy to hear her last words. The shock was amplified when she heard who the farewell message was meant to. Then she saw him, the dark, cold, handsome prince. And her shock was replaced by understanding. Her mother had impeccable tastes in men. She observed him throughout the court days, looking for any opportunity to meet him, but he would vanish as soon as it was time to mingle. What she did notice was how casual his relationship was with the old king. Jaehaerys the Wise was formal with pretty much all of his subjects and family. Face remained neutral throughout the court proceeding. It would change as soon as Naruto Targaryen, the demon prince, made his presence known. The king would smile brightly and gesture for said young man to join him up on the pedestal. Even her father, the Hand, looked shocked every time the silverette was called up on the pedestal. The king would make jabs at his grandson throughout the court, showing a side that neither she nor her strict father had seen, evident from his wide-eyed expression. Even the Dark Prince would offer a lopsided smirk once in a while. It was heartwarming, to be honest. But now her patience was over. She needed to meet him. She had tried to find him during the festivities, but he was not there, as always. She recently got word that he was guarding the king's tent personally. She wandered through the camp with a determined look on her face, heading straight for the largest tent. The shadowy figure sitting outside the tent before a bonfire was a dead giveaway as to who it was. That and the man had silver hair. The flames reflected strongly in the prince's eyes as he stared into the fire, unaware of his surroundings. Alicent's eyes widened at the shadow behind Naruto's form. Look out! Ancient legends from the Valyrian Freehold spoke of true dragon riders possessing the ability to resist the burning of fire. To walk through fire, to become one with the flames and bath in them like water. None had ever dared to prove if the legends were true or not. But none were more tempted than him, maybe because he could feel a subconscious kinship to the roaring inferno. Did all of his family feel the pull of the flames? Did it call to them like it did to him? Did it appeal to their dormant nature like his? He assumed negative. They lacked the blood for it. Hearing the sounds of twigs cracking under delicate feet, the prince looked at the approaching figure of a curvy young girl heading straight for him. Alicent Hightower, daughter of the Otto Hightower, hand to the king. She was a beautiful young lass, he had to admit, quite pleasing to the eyes. Her soft-spoken demeanor was arousing, to be honest, especially when his mind conjured up images of what he could do to that cute little. For someone of her age and gender, she was tall and endowed. The young heiress was dressed in a long green dress, befitting a young girl of the court, decorated with different floral designs. The cups of her dress bulging outwards hinted at the copious amount of teenage titflesh straining against the fabric, showing promise for further growth. The curve beyond the waist accentuated the wideness of her thick hips, no doubt sporting an ass that could ruin marriages. In fact, he didn't even need to look at her back to see that extra jiggle at the back was that of her rump. She was certainly gifted, like her mother. The young girl had been stalking him for some days now. It seems her patience was at an end now. Chuckling at her persistence, the young prince turned to the flames and awaited her arrival, only for his ears to perk up as additional sounds echoed around the clearing, one directly behind him. Silently reaching for the handle of Dark Sister, the demon prince waited in silence as the presences enclosed around him. Look out, it all happened so fast. Alicent's eyes flew open as a dark figure, dressed in rags and armed with a twisted scythe, appeared over the prince's head and swung madly. Her heart almost stopped when the demon prince retaliated with a sudden flash of steel and the attacker fell headless into the flames. Placing a hand over her to stop herself from throwing up, the young girl watched in shock as the silverette picked up the severed head and raised it to his eye level. Faith militants. As soon as the words left his, a dozen men rushed into the clearing and surrounded the alert Targaryen. I was wondering when you little worms would grow a spine and show yourselves. Surrender yourself to the seven and atone for your sins, freak, one of the militants, obviously the leader, growled angrily as he stepped forward and crossed his arms, the circular designs with a seven-headed star in the middle visible on his forehead. You are but a product of sinful union between siblings, an abomination to the natural order. Naruto smirked in approval, a rare smile of utter darkness flashing on his lips. The sin is what makes it so pleasurable. Alicent could feel a dark blush creeping up her face as her body reacted to the dark smirk and the meaning behind his words. This was a side of the prince she had not seen. Frankly, it was kind of hot. Kill the demon spawn. The atmosphere of the clearing more than few degrees as the word demon left the militants. Before they could gather themselves to attack the sneering prince, he had already cut through 3 of them with a few seconds and in the processing of beheading the 4th. Die. Sidestepping the sword strike, the Targaryen pushed his sword through the militant's legs and cleaved upwards, making a deep slash in the middle to the center of his with a bloodied grin. The Hightower heiress watched in revolting fascination as Naruto blurred through the militants, cutting, slashing, beheading, stabbing and gutting them without a hint of mercy. This wasn't a battle of equals, it was more like a dozen sheep trapped in the wolf's den, or dragon's den in this case. Within minutes, only one of them remained standing, the leader, as he had stayed behind to watch the prince die, not expecting him to kill his men for sport. The grin even frightened her. Seeing her standing behind a tree at the back, the faith soldier went for a mad dash towards her position, scythe at the ready as he roared. Ah! Alicent screamed into the clearing as the scythe gleamed a menacing silver and aimed for her head. The young girl put her delicate hands before her face in a hopeless attempt to shield herself as the weapon drew closer. It never came. The sound of a lifeless body hitting the grassy floor caused her to open her eyes, widening in surprise as she found the militant dead before her feet and the prince's sword embedded into his back. A week later, Red Keep, King's Landing. Having returned to the capital a few days ago, Alicent could barely enjoy the new wonders she was presented with, mind too occupied with the occurrences of the road. The prince had saved her. He had saved her life, without even knowing who she was. The events following the attack were too hectic for her to approach him and talk, coupled with the fact that she was almost traumatized by the near-death experience. The king was alerted to the attack. As soon as the old ruler made sure that his grandson was unharmed, he sent for all the guards that had been assigned to watch duty. It was her first time seeing the kind monarch actually angry. Her father had confirmed that it had something to do with the attackers actually assaulting his grandson more than the attack itself, or that the old cult was resurfacing again. 5 guards were hanged that night. Naruto was even quieter than before, a fact that worried the wise king. Nevertheless, they returned safely the rest of the trip. The demon prince was glued to his grandfather's carriage and more alert than ever. He was the only person who believed that the attackers had been after the king rather than him. As soon as they entered the Red Keep, he vanished as always, not appearing in court for several days. No one knew where he was. Until recently, when she had asked the queen to be Aemma Targaryen, Prince's twin sister. Apparently, he was holed up in his quarters since his return, not meeting anyone but his grandfather and sister. She was not going to be patient any longer. The prince needed to know how thankful she was to him for saving her life, and giving him her mother's last message. Spotting the wooden door to the prince's chambers, Alicent hurried over to the entrance, not wanting to lose the young royalty again. Knocking on the door a few times and receiving no response, the Hightower heiress made up her mind and opened it right away, meekly getting inside before she could regret her action. Or at least that's she had mind. She never had the chance to do such a bold thing, as the door to the chamber was slightly opened, leaving enough space for a single eye. Looking around the empty corridor, the young girl smiled sheepishly and put her eye to the opening. Her eyes flew open at the sight before her. Oh my god! Alicent screamed inside her mind to find the rogue Prince Naruto and Queen who never was, Rhaenys Targaryen, wife of Esser Curlys Valerion, together inside, half naked and connected at the hips. The young prince was sitting on the edge of his bed, pants around his ankles, shockingly thick mast of his manhood leisurely sawing in and out of Rhaenys' core. The upper part of the princess's blouse-like dress was essentially undone in its entirety to showcase her ample, pale breasts in their full, meaty glory. Naked below the waist, the prince had his hands sinking into supple flesh of his aunt's infamous Targaryen hips as he drove in and out of her while staring straight into each other's eyes like long-lost lovers. Alicent's young eyes drove away from the arousing romantic way they were staring at each other's eyes to where Rhaenys' thick legs were wrapped around each side of Naruto's waist, a blush creeping up her cheeks as arousal took over her thoughts despite her surprise at finding the nephew and aunt engaged in incestuous depravity. She knew that Targaryens had no qualms about bedding their own siblings, but the surprising part was that Rhaenys was married to the master of Driftmark and had 2 children with him. How could she even think about cheating on her husband when said man was still within the walls of the Red Keep? A shocked gasp uttered through her closed lips as her impressionable eyes got an eyeful of the fat that was ramming in and out of the princess's twat as it was pulled out, showing the entirety of the veiny monstrosity. Ears perking up at the sound behind the door, Rhaenys was quick to turn her cousin's head back to her face before he could look at the source of the sound. "Eyes on me, cousin," the busty princess purred seductively, possessively wrapping her arms around Naruto's shoulders as though making her claim clear to the world that the young prince belonged to her. "Having those daring eyes on me while you take me as your own is what makes this union even more sinful." The Lady of Driftmark could feel her virile lover pulsing within her sheet, hugging his head against the softness of her massive breasts. His purple, knowing eyes stayed glued to the crack of the door. A sly smirk played on the MILF's lips as she continued her idle stare into the unknown, widening with each passing second. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. Purple mischievous eyes, filled to the brim with amusement and seductive depravity. Rhaenys looked straight at the crack and continued grinding herself on Naruto's pelvis, biting her lower lip in bliss as the thick bumped against the entrance to her womb. The little girl was not going away. How exciting! The young prince was oblivious to the thoughts going on in his MILF cousin's head as she idly grinded her twat, too distracted by the sensation of feeling the woman's wetly squeeze around on his. "I want to try something else, lover," the elderly lady of Driftmark whispered hotly into Naruto's ear, unwrapping her thick, creamy legs from around his waist. While he was reluctant to leave the snug nest of his cousin's incredible, trying something else was always welcome. Letting go of the MILF's wide, motherly hips, he watched in smug satisfaction as the elderly Targaryen took a few seconds to adjust to the weight of her own body upon her wobbly legs before stepping back, causing his throbbing meat to pop out of her stretched cunt. "Need help?" the rogue prince uttered smugly, earning a joking slap to the arm from the chuckling MILF as she tried to properly support her weight on her wobbly legs. "After I'm done with you, dear cousin, you'll need more than milk of the poppy to bear the agony of your shattered bones." Rhaenys purred sultrily, running a delicate hand across the prince's wide, muscular torso, teasingly trailing all the down to his pelvis and just above the meaty rod ready to destroy her core. The meaty monster throbbed angrily as the elderly Targaryen MILF dropped to her knees between the prince's legs, utterly submitting herself to the young man. Naruto's pulsed a deep red as the queen who never was knelt before him so submissively. She knew all too well what her submission was doing to him, and if her knowing smirk was any indication, she was pleased with the results. A mighty log of meat, staunch and strong, still with the MILF's cunt juices, sticking out like a third leg from his pelvis, the demon prince stood up. Eyes turning to the crack of the door for a mere second, Rhaenys smiled slyly and looked up at her imposing cousin with a submissive expression, folding her arms at her laps and sticking out the fatness of her massive breasts. "Command me and I shall obey." Quote, quote, it was short, it was quick, and by God did it make her wetter than a soaked towel. Pursing her lips around the tip of Naruto's mighty, the MILF's sleek, pouty lips wrapped around the large shroom of the head, ing on it intricately, gradually taking more and more into her until before pulling it into her. Slurp, slurp, moaning slyly around the meat, Rhaenys peered up at Naruto from below to gauge his reactions, smiling around at the sight of seeing him groan. Rolling her wandering tongue around the pulsing head of his length, ing and slurping sloppily on the meat, Rhaenys turned her head slightly to the side and gazed at the open crack. Seeing a dazed green orb staring at her from behind the door, watching her off her cousin and the telltale sign of movement at the lower region of the peeking eye, the MILF smirked slyly around Naruto's. Took her long enough to start pleasuring herself, the elderly Targaryen thought smugly as she turned back to gazing into her cousin's eyes and increased her pace by ing more than half of Naruto's into her, each suction motion faster and deeper than the last, while grabbing onto his muscular thighs. SHLURP. SHLURP. The large bedchamber was witness to the sounds of squelching noises as Rhaenys' head bobbed feverishly between his legs, shoving the meaty into her with zealous gusto whilst still maintaining her smooth grace as a lady. "You're more eager than normal." Rhaenys was full on throating his, pouty lips sliding around the very thickness of his shaft as she swallowed the meat log into the deepest parts of her gullet, causing her cousin to moan loudly as he tilted his head back in pure bliss and grabbed onto the back of Rhaenys' head with one of his hands. "Rhaenys, God, I'm going to come." The young prince groaned out through gritted teeth as he pounded his hips against the elderly woman's delicate face, causing the MILF's throat to bulge obscenely to the thickness of his member. At this point, the Lady of Driftmark had lost all control over the situation as her cousin's hands grabbed onto the silver locks of her hair and continuously bobbed her head on the entirety of his like a driven maniac. "Get ready for my seed." Before he could erupt inside the MILFs, Rhaenys pulled her face off of his length with a wet plop of saliva and flashed a sultry look at her young lover, grabbing the saliva S with both hands as she vigorously stroked him to completion. "I find that your seed serves as invigorating ointment for my skin," the Lady of Driftmark purred, smooth silky voice sultrier than ever as her eyes stared straight into her cousin's and delicate hands stroked the mighty. "I can always let you ravage my gullet if you so wish after I've had my bath of your seed, cousin." "Why, you slut!" The fierce look, submissive position between his legs, massive out in the open, gargantuan Targaryen ass cushioning her weight on the ground and delicate hands driving his crazy with their gentle rubs, Naruto had no chance. The robed prince came like a pent-up geyser. Roaring like a dragon out for blood, the young prince let loose as he felt his spurt and twitch aggressively, sending thick ropes of sperm heading directly into Rhaenys' face. Thick, gooey spurts of cream painted the MILF's cheeks, chin, forehead, and, utterly drenching her face in their gooey whiteness before targeting the object of his never-ending. Her massive, ever-perky and doughy breasts. Splurt, splurt, splurt. The Lady of Driftmark patiently knelt before the young prince, eyes closed and lips turned up into a smug smile while her virile cousin rained spurts upon spurts of his cum onto her form, leaving not an inch spared. She could hear the sounds of hurried footsteps across the corridor, signifying that the young girl had left. She smiled even wider. "Throne room, Red Keep, King's Landing. Prince Naruto is here, Your Grace." Letting a smile flash on his lips, the old king gestured for his court to be dismissed promptly. While surely surprised by the sudden change in his mood, the gathered people had no qualms about leaving as soon as the command was issued as they poured out of the gates of the throne room. "You too, Otto." The former resident of Aldtown looked surprised as he turned to the smiling ruler. "Your Grace, it's not an official court business. I just need to have a word with my grandson." Jaehaerys spoke firmly, pleasant smile still blasting on his lips. "As you command, my king." The hand bowed curtly and left without a word, offering a nod to the demon prince as he entered. Dressed in his usual black and red attire, dark sister sheathed at his belt, Naruto strode into the throne room with the grace of a seasoned warrior, while the pale king watched in ever-increasing pride. "Grandfather, what do you see?" Jaehaerys asked in a loud but commanding tone, making it clear that it was serious matter. An old man trying to cut the image of a conqueror, the silver-haired warrior replied bluntly. The old king smiled. "Join me, my boy," not one to refuse his elderly grandfather. Naruto nodded softly and walked up the pedestal with a curious look on his face as he rounded the throne and stood beside the king. "What do you see now?" The robed prince blinked. An empty chamber, no subjects to rule. The wise king started in a soft, mentoring tone as he gestured to the empty room. "A gemstone looks remarkable by itself, but when placed amidst mere rubble, you start to see why it is remarkable in the first place." Quote, quote. Similarly, a king, no matter how wise, brave, and strong he is but a mere man with a crown without his subjects. Shouldn't you be giving these lessons to Viserys? The bitterness in his tone was quite visible. Jaehaerys chuckled good-naturedly. "While fate has seen to it that Viserys ascends the throne, I have a feeling that saving our family shall fall on your shoulders in the days to come, Naruto." Perhaps the worries of this old man remain as that, mere worries with no substance behind it. But should the day ever come, you'll need to understand the true value of your position to make better decisions. "I shall do what is expected of me, grandfather." "Splendid. Are you well?" Naruto asked in a concerned tone as he leaned towards the weakly smiling king after noticing a trickle of blood from his nose, which was promptly wiped away from said ruler. "I am fine, child," Jaehaerys responded with a soft smile as he stood up from the pointy throne with a bit of help from the strong Silverette. "Now on to the reason why I summoned you here." Of course, the prince was more focused on the king now as he walked down the pedestal. The old king was much paler than usual, a rather serious limp to his steps and his limbs were shaking more. Something was up with him. "Your grandmother has sent word from Dragonstone regarding the emergence of a rogue dragon attacking fishers and boats alike within its territory towards the eastern coast of the island. The dragon was said to have been slumbering at an underground cave beneath the castle, but recent developments indicate that such is not the case any longer." "Can't the other dragons subdue it?" the robed prince asked curiously, ear perking up at the thought of a new dragon. A robe or wild one at that. Grandmother does have Silverwing, an experienced beast, that one. By all accounts, it's a mere speculation, but I do believe that your grandmother is far beyond the age to bear sitting on dragon back, especially to battle another dragon. If reports are to be believed, this new beast seemed to be almost the size of Vagar, a most troubling thought to be sure. Well, to be perfectly honest, his grandmother was anything but weak of bones at her age. I mean, she could bounce and ride his until the first rays of dawn and still keep going without feeling tired. Riding a dragon would be easy for her. But now his interest was piqued. Any dragon the same size as Vagar was worth seeing. We do have other dragon riders on Dragonstone. The wise king smiled softly, sitting on the stairs to the pedestal as he gestured for the space next to him. Yes, we do, but if some miraculous chance they do subdue the beast, we would miss the chance of finding a dragon for you to bond with, my boy. Naruto shifted his head towards his grandfather sharply, almost dropping to the stumbling down the stairs as tried to sit down. You want me to try and bond with it? I don't see why not, the Targaryen ruler commented idly. You're the only one of my immediate grandchildren with no dragon. Emma has refused to bond with one, and I'm afraid Viserys is far too hung up on Balerion to find another one. There is a reason why I don't have one, the silver-haired warrior muttered with a frown. I will not give the realm another reason to fear me. A true king needs to inspire a certain degree of fear to keep his quarreling subjects in line, the wise king said softly, a fatherly softness to his tone as he placed a pale hand on his grandson's shoulder. I cannot live forever. My boy, is it so foolish of this old man to see his grandson on the back of a dragon and departed with knowing that his legacy is secured? Quote, 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 you have gotten so good with emotional blackmailing over the years, old man, Naruto deadpanned with a dry tone. The old king burst out laughing, an uncharacteristic fit of chortles escaping his lips as he laughed to the heavens, genuine mirth laced within his chuckles. Even Naruto was forced to chuckle at his reaction. Seeing as the old king calmed down from his laughing fit, Naruto gripped the handle of Dark Sister and moved to stand up. Your command shall be fulfilled, your grace. A weak hand stopped him before he could stand up. Stay, Jaehaerys started in a soft, almost nostalgic tone, not looking at his surprised grandson as he stared at the golden red light coming from the giant glass behind the throne. I've much to share with you, child. Dragonstone, a remote island at the entrance to Blackwater Bay, below the Dragonmont, the original seat of House Targaryen in Westeros, and the former colonized and fortified westernmost outpost of the Valyrian freehold during its rule, and home to the survivors after the Doom. Getting off the rowing boat at the coast and leaving a few of the servants to pull into the land, Naruto started for the steep stairs leading to the Draconian castle. While his grandfather had suggested the idea of sending a squad of royal soldiers to help in his cause, he had refused. Against a dragon, numbers meant more burning targets for the beast. Plus, he needed to deal with it alone. If he were to test the doubts he had, he needed to confront the beast alone. Risk his life if need be, but he needed to get to the bottom of the strange pull from within. Walking across the fenced pathway along the steep piece of island leading to the castle, the robed prince could see several dragons flying above him. The most spectacular of all was Silverwing, his grandmother's familiar. The Septa used to tell him stories of how upon his birth, his deceased mother had taken him on a ride across the narrow sea on dragon back, even going against her husband's brother. They used to go on and narrate his reaction to the ride. That he giggled and laughed throughout the ride, not afraid of the blurring wind or the massive beast he was placed upon. His grandmother had ranted his mother's ears off after the stunt, not letting her come anywhere near him. His mother would plead with her and argue that her son was special and that he had purer Valyrian blood than anyone, that he had a deeper connection to the beasts than them. The story would always make him smile at his mother's intuition and grandmother's protectiveness. To think she loved him as much even before he started ramming her incredibly full form. The prince chuckled loudly at the thought. Welcome back, Prince Naruto. The silver-haired prince waved off the guard's greeting with a smile as he strode into the castle, deep in thought. If his late mother had so much trust in him, why didn't he bond with any dragon during his childhood? Granted, being the second-born son, he was mostly ignored for Viserys by the court. It got even worse when his parents died, specifically his mother. He had few friends at court even during their presence, but it got worse when he proved to be too proficient in combat and seasoned knights. They feared his talents, his potential and what he could become if he was given even a fraction of the training that Viserys was offered. So he was cast aside, ignored, and whispered at behind his back. He responded by training harder than ever. There was only so much his grandparents, aunt and twin, could do to shut their ass. They could glare them into silence at court, but none could do anything about what was said behind his back. It didn't bother him. Their fear of him fueled his ambitions. But the nagging feeling at the back of his head always came rushing back whenever the issue of a dragon would come up. The dragon egg placed at his cradle never hatched. The maesters dubbed it as an omen that such was a sign for a greater calamity, and that the crimson shine in his silver locks was another to confirm the first. One of those maesters found himself cut in half and in the stomach of Silverwing within seconds of saying a bit too much about him. The court learned to never bad the young prince in front of his grandparents, especially his grandmother. Arriving at the massive gate to the royal chambers of the inner castle, Naruto dismissed the guards with a subtle nod and walked inside as the doors were opened, raising an eyebrow at the surprisingly large number of soldiers standing in attention. Well, it seems that his arrival was expected, if the way they bowed and welcomed him was any indication. One of them, a little different from the others in terms of garb, stepped forward. "Greetings, my prince. I am Stefan Darklin, Lord Commander of the royal troops stationed here. It is an absolute honor to personally meet you," the head of the guards announced politely, prompting all the assembled guards to bow respectfully. "I hope your travel was pleasant." "Surprising," Naruto started in a genuinely surprised tone as he approached the battalion. "You seem to have been informed of my trip beforehand." "That is indeed correct, my prince," Daisuke retorted softly. "Her Majesty, the Queen, predicted your visit to the island after news of the wild dragon reached King's Landing." "Expected as much." A soft smile appeared on the middle-aged knight's face as he bowed low and gestured for the prince to step forward. The love between the Queen and the prince was evident to everyone. It was heartwarming to see them smile at the mere mentioning of the other's name. Being new to the position, he had only heard of the prince from the Queen, but meeting the charismatic boy was something entirely different. No wonder Her Majesty spoke so highly of him. He had the presence of a conqueror. "Her Highness is awaiting your arrival," the commander muttered in subservience, gesturing to the giant gates of the castle with a bow. "Please follow me." With a soft nod, the young prince followed the middle-aged knight into the castle in a graceful stride. Militaristic wouldn't be the proper word to describe the inner atmosphere of the castle. Everything was adorned out of necessity and function, not style. The only aspect that separated the inside of the castle from any normal palace was the abnormal amount of carvings and runes etched onto the walls. Vivid and detailed depictions of various dragons immortalized in their most dangerous of moments. He couldn't wait to meet his grandmother. Her massive, meaty breasts pressed against his face and her dripping snatch slid smoothly onto his erect, a squelching sound echoing across the throne room and the feeling of warm wetness surrounding his meat. Naruto groaned weakly as his grandmother mounted him completely. "You're than last time, dear lord," the surprised prince cried out, feeling overwhelmed by the blissful sensation of her mature wrapping Lee around his length. God damn, she was. It felt like she wanted his load as soon as he was inside. "It's been ages since I last had you." Alicent slid herself all the way down, swallowing up inch by inch of the fat dong into herself, until the meaty fatness of her thick buttocks touched his pelvis as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Finally, quote exclamation mark quote, the warm wetness of Alicent's had more than just disoriented the rogue prince. The wide-hipped queen paid little mind to her grandson's dazed expression as she proceeded to roll her thick hips up along his waist in a hypnotic pace. The feeling of his being taken back and forth inside her wet velvet pocket had the boy on edge already. "Do you have any idea how much I've waited to have you?" She breathed excitably as she pressed her pelvis down onto his lap greedily. In and out his member pushed into her quim in wet squelching thrusts. "I'm starting to get the gist of it," he whispered huskily, the death squeeze of her cunt around his member making him squirm. "I don't think Aegon meant for the throne to be used as such." Naked for the entire world to see, the rogue prince was seated on the massive lump of carved stone, hands placed on the handrests while his sinfully thick grandmother rode him to her heart's content. "A throne symbolizes control, dear," the gilf whispered into his ear, gently rolling the meatiness of her rump onto his waist, much to his whimpers of pleasure as he felt her cunt swallow his member back up. Control which I currently have over you. The change in her behavior, from a loving, innocent but mischievous woman to a hungry, dominant one had his throbbing like a volcano. It was true, she had her nimble feet placed on the back of his hands, keeping them captive as she rode him. Naruto had no say in this, nor did he want to say anything other than moan loudly in pleasure. The feeling of hurrying him into her cervix was overwhelming. A king can rule all he wants, but if he doesn't conquer his queen's womb like a proper conqueror, she revolts. Alisan continued with a wide smirk, beautiful eyes shadowed by sweaty silver locks as she tossed her head back, enjoying the blissful sensation of her grandson's monstrous pistoning up into her abused cervix. And takes control. The demon prince was too shocked at her change to even blink as he stared slack-jawed at her wildly bouncing breasts repeatedly slapping against her chin and down on his face as she rode him like stallion. Cunt squeezing around his beast and fat breasts smothering his chin, Alisan cupped his face with delicate fingers and pulled him up into her lips for a deep, incestuous. Purple cloudy eyes closed shut in grip end as their lip lock became more frenzied as the prince responded to her. She was still in control though. Your queen is in revolt. Are you going to let her get away with such a transgression or conquer her womb like a true king? Naruto moaned into her as she grabbed the sides of his face even harder and pushed her even further down onto his. Damn woman was going to milk him dry at this rate. Naruto could have sworn he heard the stony throne creak as his sinfully thick grandmother rode him even harder, soft, curvy body humping and bouncing wildly on top of him with her cunt squeezing his length in deep. Conquer my womb, punish your queen, take me like the dragon you claim to be. Before he started pushing his hips upward to meet her downward thrusts, eliciting musical shrieks of pleasure with each impact as the farthest wall of her womb was pushed up her abdomen by the fat head. Alisan felt her cervix clamp up as she began to reach her climax while swallowing his tongue, feeling his pistoning meat throb within her wet folds. Naruto never felt such pleasure before and reached his release before he even realized it. A loud blissful moan entered the woman's as she wrapped her arms fully around his neck. She came. MMMGGGGGGG. Alisan shrieked into his as she felt her love muscles clench on this throbbing meat over and over again, the vice grip prompting him to grunt like a beast and buck his hips up into her soft form, each thrust unleashing a thick gooey torrent of sperm straight into her womb. The gorgeous gilf writhed, squirmed and shook in his lap, eyes rolled into the back of her head, spasming walls keeping him deep as he came repeatedly into her. Coming down from her orgasmic high, the proud grandmother moaned in satisfaction as she felt her grandson's incestuous cum pour into her womb, the very womb that had birthed his parents. His monstrous member pumped and throbbed inside her quim forever until he finally stopped. Having filled his grandmother's womb to the point of bursting. Eastern Coast, Dragonstone. Walking down the coastline with a soft frown on his sharp visage, Naruto idly gripped the handle of Dark Sister as he tried to find the entrance to the underground cave the Crimson Beast was said to come out of. The queen had left promptly. Why? The reason behind her departure made even less sense. She wanted to see his grandfather. Why? Their marriage had been strained and practically non-existent since the death of their favorite daughter and the estrangement of the other one. They spoke 2 to 3 words in a few months. Both were only trying to give the image that nothing was wrong because of him. They didn't want him to decide between staying with either of them. He loved them for that. But why would she leave him, especially when he hadn't seen her for so many months? She drained his balls and left with that damn seductively loving smile of hers. The charred, strangely destroyed entrance to one of the many caves gained his attention as he observed the entrance. It was rigged and uneven, almost like it had been blasted open by sheer force. There was no doubt in his mind that this was where the dragon resided. The giant claw prints on the sand provided a picture he was not yet ready to imagine. The print was far too big to be a normal dragon. Black armor, forged from the finest of steels in all the realms, shined within the dimly lit cave as he strode forward, metal plates clinking against each other. Dark Sister at the ready and ears perked for any movement, Naruto glided forth without a hint of hesitation. The dragon blood within him roared and churned, hyping his body into overdrive for what was to come. The anticipation was too much. His senses were heightened, his sense of smell much stronger than ever and eyes seeing far into the cave. The rogue prince grinned hungrily. He could almost taste the potent presence of the fiery beast. It was close. Unlike the other caves where some of the other wild dragons such as Sheepstealer and Cannibal rested, this one wasn't littered with bones of men and animals. It was silent as the grave. No movements, no sign of life or death anywhere. The beast truly had been slumbering for decades. Cold violet eyes widened in surprise as he came across a massive hull-like clearing at the end of the cave, almost like a tunnel opening up into a dome-shaped arena, molded from historic rock formation. The temperature rose incredibly high as he cautiously approached the edge of the cave, beads of sweat gathering within his armor from the searing heat. And it was getting stronger with each step, until he walked out of the tunnel-like path and into the edge of the dome. He saw it. His eyes flew open. A month later, Dragonstone, sitting on the sandy beach, right in front of the cave he had explored a month ago, and watching the waves rush towards the coast with a neutral expression, Naruto idly twirled the piece of paper sent from King's Landing. So much had happened within the 1 month of his absence from the capital. His brother, Viserys, was pushed even further into his duties as the named heir. The letter said that he was almost always seen beside his grandfather since the last week. It seems his grandfather wanted the man to take his crown sooner than later. The Hand's daughter, Alicent, had sent him a letter along with a sealed scroll, saying that it was from her mother. He had known about the late Lady Hightower, a rather loving but strict woman whose bed he had shared over the last few years of her life. A remarkable woman, that one and a very passionate lover. It took more than half the night to satisfy her, only to be reawakened within a week. A few orgasms could not keep the woman down. The change in her character, being strict in court, and a full demon in bed, had always caused him to laugh. It took a piece of his heart to hear of her unfortunate demise. She did not deserve to die that young. Reading the letter only made his situation worse. Her desire to see him one last time, that she forgave him for not being there, and her gratitude for giving her happiness and peace during the years he was with her were the headlines of the letter. He was reminded of his lack of presence in her funeral, or that he was busy settling unrests among the lords after it was known that his grandfather was going to choose an heir while she was being cremated. Even when he returned and heard of her death, he did not visit Aldtown. How could he? Everything reminded him of her. He did not want that feeling. Looking towards the sea, right in the direction of King's Landing, Naruto gripped the letter Li as a pang of hurt shot through his heart. The greatest regret at the moment was that he missed the birth of his niece. His twin sister, Emma Targaryen, had given birth to a beautiful girl a few days ago. The regret part was that he knew his idiotic brother would directly or indirectly hurt his sister's feeling for not giving him a male heir which he so desperately wanted. With him there, he wouldn't even dare hint at it, let alone say it. But it had happened now. There was no crying over spilled milk. It was in the past. He had to look to the future. Exploring the cave and seeing the ancient beast had opened his eyes to his ancestry. There was so much that his family, the Targaryens, had either no knowledge or forgotten about their past, of Valyria and their history. Theirs was the greatest empire since the Dawn Age. How was it that they knew so little? Why was there no ambition to gain more knowledge? To know the secrets of his forefathers? To know what they knew? Of Valyria, dragons and the freehold. He had sent a letter to the king, asking for permission to explore the ruins of Valyria. The answer came with positive results. I hope this letter finds you in perfect health, my boy. I may even be forgiven for saying that King's Landing has never appeared so dark and foreboding without your light. Your grandmother agrees with me. Understand that what you ask of me could hold dire consequences, for no one knows what lies within the ruins after the doom. As a king, I am bound by duty to deny your request for your own safety, but as a proud grandfather, I cannot stop the pull of your ambition. I feel like destiny is calling you to those ruins. Go, child, go and see what draws your attention from within. Return to us when you have satiated your desire for knowledge. I shall have a present ready for you upon your arrival. I don't feel the need to say it again, but know that this old man is proud of the man you have become. Jaehaerys I Targaryen, your grandfather, Pocketing the letter into a small bundle of necessities, Naruto stood up with a chuckle. He owed his old grandparents quite a lot, everything to be honest. He would never forget their love and devotion to him. But now to explore his past, Turning to the blasted entrance of the cave, Naruto took a deep breath as he prepared for what was to come. "Come forth, Hyperion," the High Valyrian command echoed across the beach and within the cave. Everything was silent. Naruto grinned widely as the ground shook violently, the wet sand almost shivering in fright as a deafeningly thunderous roar echoed from within the cave. 3 years later, Red Keep, King's Landing. It was a rather calm day in the Crownlands, almost too calm. The sky was covered by dark clouds, a foreboding sense of thunderstorm in the air. It was rather odd for King's Landing to be shadowed in clouds, let alone rain. Seated at the stairs leading to the main castle of the Red Keep, back resting against one of the many pillars and a large book clutched to her ample, Alicent Hightower stared mindlessly at the cloudy sky with no light in her beautiful eyes. All these months in the capital and she hadn't seen it rain before. It was always sunny, bright and lively, full of energy and hustle-bustle, always inviting and welcoming. It made waking up early in the morning so much easy. But now, it was like a completely different place. Dark and gloomy, covered in darkness, repelling everyone. The Red Keep was darker than the coat of the Black Heart of the Kingswood. Thus why she was sitting outside. Even the gate guards had tried their best to get her to go inside, but it felt weird and scary today. "What is that?" Hearing strangled gasps from the guards behind her, Alicent moved to turn her heads towards and see what had them so shocked. Then she saw it. Seven's mercy, she whispered in awe, hidden behind a wave of fear as the dragon kept getting larger and scarier the more it neared. A massive beast, easily dwarfing all the dragons that she had seen in King's Landing, was steadily approaching from the west, covering Blackwater Bay with a few flaps of its wings as it blurred towards the keep. "It's heading straight for us," informed the prince at once. Within seconds, the wide yard, able to house an army of 5,000 strong, was partially filled with royal soldiers with different varieties of weapons to counter the monstrosity heading for them. Alicent could hear screams of fright outside the keep and knew that almost everyone near to the coastal sides could see the beast approaching. The day got even darker as it crossed the gullet. "What is going on here?" Alicent got up as soon as the Prince of Dragonstone, Viserys, arrived with a platoon of Kingsguards and turned to the way everyone was looking at, only for his eyes to snap open as they focused on the massive dragon. B. Balerion. The name itself was enough to spread a wave of fear as well as relief within the keep. Relief because Balerion was a tamed dragon of the Targaryen family, and fear because of what it was capable of. Rhaenys, eyes focused on the approaching figure, hummed in thought and shook her head. Balerion was called the Black Dread for a reason. That thing has crimson scales, not black. Wild or tamed, we best be careful. It seems to be as big as Vagar. In a surprising turn of events, the beast released a mighty roar, shaking the very foundation of the Red Keep before it blurred upwards and disappeared into the dark, cloudy sky. Screams of terror and shock erupted at once as the mighty monstrosity descended upon the yard with a mighty flap of its wings, covering the entire yard in its shadow. None could explain the heart-stopping fear as the Crimson Dragon, in a show of its strength, landed on the steep cliffside with a mighty thunder as its claws dug into the hillside. It was magnificent, crimson, almost like boiling lava-colored scales running all over its massive body. The beast had pitch-black mane running down its scaly back and arms, connected to its wings. 3 pairs of sharp extensions from its jaw, a dark-colored wing-like design over its golden eyes that was complemented by 2 oval designs right above it, also appearing on its paws, 4 extending from the forearm and 3 on each finger, and a pair of jagged horns extending from the base of its skull and scales extending from the back of her knees cut quite the image. It looked like a walking manifestation of fire itself. The gathered men and women could feel their hairs stand in attention as the gigantic monstrosity looked at them, almost intelligently, sizing everyone up one by one and scaring them half to death before it huffed in approval and lowered its head over the fortress wall and into the yard, taking almost a half of the total area. Someone was riding it. It was none other than the rogue prince, Naruto Targaryen, himself, dressed in an armor unlike what was common or even unique in Westeros. It was different, demonic almost, especially the draconian helmet. "I was hoping to see grandfather upon my return." A deep, throaty voice came from the visibly changed prince as he used the side head extensions of the dragon like a ladder to get down before patting the beast. Pushing all shocks to the side for a few seconds, everyone turned to Viserys as he stepped forward. "His Majesty, the king, has passed away." What if one were to ask from among the royal family as to the location of their wayward member, the demon prince himself? They would most likely direct you towards two locations: the God's Woods within the keep, or the lair of Hyperion. But he was mostly found in the lair, sitting against a boulder in a trance. The king's death had almost crippled the royal family, for Jaehaerys was a king unlike any other. He was the longest reigning king of the dynasty, a peaceful and conflict-free reign at that. Such standard was hard to reach. It had taken the royal family days to deal with the death of their elder, but they recovered soon enough. Most specifically Viserys, as he was expected to pick up where his grandfather had left. The prince was crowned within a week, in a ceremony that cost the crown quite a few thousand gold dragons. The only one who never recovered was Naruto Targaryen. Everyone remembered the day he arrived on his monstrous dragon and was told of the king's passing. It would go down in history as the scariest day for King's Landing. The news had been met with minutes of silent denial, and soon replaced by anger. As if sensing the anger of its rider, the dragon had huffed and growled like the beast it was, its crimson scales almost glowing like molten lava as it raised its gigantic head up and roared to the heavens, unleashing a fire so bright that it had been observed from the high tower of Aldtown. Whether it was exaggerated or not was up for debate, but the scene had left more than a few people traumatized, developing a deep-seated fear of the dragon. The roaring dragon could be seen connected to the emotions of its rider as the prince had been observed gritting his teeth in silent rage. It had almost looked like the calm before a destructive storm, almost like the prince had lost all sense of control as he reached for the handle of Dark Sister, until the recently widowed queen, Alysanne Targaryen, arrived. The realm watched as the elderly but still young queen approached the young prince without a hint of fear, unmindful of the massive angry beast. All it took to resolve the situation was a simple hug. The dragon stopped roaring and the prince let go of his sword. But a name had spread across the realm, a name reminding everyone of what they had forgotten. The demon prince and his dragon, Hyperion the Destroyer, was on everyone's lips. To deal with housing the massive beast, Naruto had opted to house Hyperion in one of the many caves beneath Red Keep, towards the secluded beach of said Holdfast, against all suggestions from his brother to keep the dragon where the rest were housed. Naruto had refused. The beach was even more isolated now than ever, since no one wanted to be there, exactly how the prince had planned. It was therein dubbed as Hyperion's lair. Some were unfortunate enough to be assigned the task to inform the prince of any summons by the king. One of those unfortunate souls, a rather young addition to the city watch, tentatively trudged in the sandy beach towards the ominous cave, sighing a sigh of relief when he found the wayward prince, recently appointed as the command of said order, sitting in front of the entrance with two swords stabbed into the sand on either side of him. Dark Sister was a rather famous sword, known to everyone in Westeros and said to have been carried by the second son of kings since Aegon the Conqueror. Naruto was the only prince to have been bestowed such an honor at the time of his 5th name day. The other sword was not so easily awarded to anyone, even princes. Blackfire, the sword of the Conqueror himself. It was passed down from one king to the next along with the throne and crown. And as was now considered to be the norm, Jaehaerys went against the norm and made it clear that the sword was to be given to Naruto should the prince not return before his death. Viserys had no problems with it, knowing that he wasn't the warrior type to begin with. The possession of the two legendary swords had caused more than a few rumors to be whispered, that the prince was getting more and more powerful with each passing day, especially after his return from across the narrow sea. "My prince, the watch has been mobilized as per your orders. They await your arrival at the gates of the keep." The watcher could feel his hair stand erect beneath his armor as puffs of searing air flooded from within the cave in between breaks. It didn't take a genius to understand it was the exhaled air from Hyperion's breathing as he slept. The prince, a much sharper, jaded, fiercer edge to his face and a dark reddish shade to his silver locks, was dressed in a simple sleeveless long black coat, over baggy black hakama, black boots, and X-shaped twin sheaths for his swords, and a gold rope coming from his right shoulder running across his to under his left arm. It took a lot of courage to stand before the powerful man and not shake in fear. In his teenage years, he was said to have been the sole reason why the Dornish incursions of the Stormlands had failed. He was 32 years old now, sharper, faster, more precise and powerful than ever. He alone was enough to stop anyone from making a stupid move against the crown. When seated on the back of his demonic dragon, it was another matter altogether. Your stance is weak, breathing too loud and focus scattered. You are new to the watch, aren't you? The young man shook, trying to stand straight as the prince's deep voice washed over the beach and his fierce eyes glanced over to him. Why yes, my prince. The prince smiled stiffly, standing on his feet and almost towering over the newbie. Not for long. The man gulped. That night, council chamber, Red Keep, King's Landing. It was an unprecedented roundup of criminals of every ilk. Your brother made a public show of dismembering and maiming until they needed a total of 2 carts to carry what had been cut off from them. King Viserys palmed his face in utter resignation as he listened to the reports of his council, most specifically his hand, Otto Hightower, regarding the actions of his younger brother. Quote, the prince cannot be allowed to act with this kind of unchecked impunity, the Hightower resident finished in his usual monotonous voice. The king sighed tiredly, gesturing to one of the guards. Summon him. Your Grace, the prince is already here, the guard replied fearfully, shifting towards the door as it was pushed open and the familiar form of the Silverette prowled inside in his usual heavy presence. Naruto. Try as he might to not let his emotions resurface, Viserys could not help but feel proud of his brother for the man he had grown to become. He was the perfect embodiment of what their house represented, a dragon in the flesh of man. Brother, came the prince's deep voice as he walked in and took a seat to the left of the king, garbed in his usual garment but with the addition of a gold cloak draped over his right shoulder and back. How long have you been here? Long enough to hear a few words, Naruto replied with a rigid smile as he turned to the frowning hand. Do go on, Sir Otto, you were saying something about my impunity. The tension between the two was increasing day by day, Viserys noted, though he had no idea why and when it had started in the first place. Suppressing the glare that was threatening to show on his face, the middle-aged man gave Naruto a firm look. You are to explain your doings with the City Watch. I do a lot of things with the City Watch, you've to be more specific than that. Otto almost growled at the smug grin. Viserys coughed into his hand to resolve the matter. Something about dismembering criminals. Those 2 words blend so perfectly, don't they? The demon prince chuckled. Our laws do not include wanton brutality in response to trivial crimes, Otto spoke up with steel in his voice. You're in command to enforce those laws, not slander them. You sleep peacefully within the keep because I am outside putting down those who prove a threat to the peace of the city, Naruto replied with a rather blunt tone, ignoring his brother's warning look as he stared at the frowning hand. It's easy to pass off remarks from within the safety of these stone walls, Sir Otto, but much of King's Landing is but a cesspool of scums and pigs of every breed. Naruto. I agree with Prince Naruto. Curlis Valerion, Master of Ships, Lord of Driftmark and husband of Princess Rhaenys, added in with an approving nod towards the prince. He was appointed as commander to deal with the criminal elements, that is what he is doing, especially at such a crucial time when nobles from all over the realm are coming to the heirs tournament. The support is appreciated, Lord Curlis, the silver-haired Targaryen said gratefully, inwardly chuckling as a thought came to his mind. The Valerians had always been in direct support of his ways, Curlis being the most vocal among them. It made him kind of guilty. He wondered if the Lord of Driftmark would still show him this kind of support if the man knew that he had utterly destroyed his wife's ass just this afternoon and said woman had been carrying the result of 2 thick loads inside her guts since. Or that he had plans to stretch her MILF out as soon as he left this meeting. I am afraid the same devotion cannot be attributed to his marital duties. The hand grabbed onto another matter promptly, knowing that the prince could not be put down in that area. He was good at that. You've not been seen at the Vale or at Runestone for quite some time now. The wielder of the twin swords raised an eyebrow. I did not realize that spying on the king's brother was part of your job as the hand. Even Viserys turned to his hand with a questioning eyebrow. The man did not meet his gaze. I do any and all that is required of me to uphold the peace. And making sure whether my wife once a month contributes to said upholding of peace. You made a vow, the brown-haired man gritted out through clenched teeth as he became the center of attention. It was clear to everyone that Naruto alone could elicit such reactions out of him. A vow to honor your wife in marriage. For the sake of peace, The council can rest assured that my bronze is satisfied on all accounts, especially in the bed. The sarcasm could almost be heard dripping from his tone as he gazed into the eyes of the hand. Unlike some so-called men, I do not leave my women craving the touch of another man while I still draw breath. Wouldn't you agree, Sir Otto? Quote, quote, oh how insensitive of me. It's been quite a few years since Lady Miranda has passed away. I cannot very well ask a widowed man about marital dilemma, now can I? The robed prince continued with a sharp, mockingly considerate tone, eyes drilling into the frowning visage of Otto. I suppose it'd be quite hard to find someone as Lady Hightower. She was quite the woman. The smirk at the end was all took for Otto to lose his temper as he pushed back his chair and stood up in anger, eyes blood red as he glared at the smirking prince. You know my brother well enough by now, Otto. Provoking you is sport for him. Viserys finally spoke up, coughing into his hand as he gestured for the pissed-off Old Town resident to sit down. It was times like these when Naruto was thankful for having the potent UAL or he had, for he could sleep with wives of stuck-up bastards like Otto and leave hints at them to that effect. In this case, his anger was completely misplaced, to be honest. While normally, any lord's amnesty towards him would almost always be in regards to their suspicions about his affair with his spouse, due to his grins and jabs mind you, but still they were justified. But Otto did not even suspect that he had been sleeping with his wife for over 5 years. He could even be forgiven for saying that he had been pounding the rather busty MILF long before her daughter's birth, continuing for a few more years even after her birth before she had to move to Old Town. The man had started hating him after a rumor spread about him. A rumor that he had slept with Alicent Hightower and taken her maidenhood. How many times did he have to say it before everyone understood it? He did not sleep with Alicent Hightower. A few hours later. Good girl, Alicent, now take it deeper. Okay. He denied sleeping with the young maiden, but no one said anything about her little that was full of his at the moment or those delicately soft hands currently cradling his large balls. He was still technically right. If one were to open the door to Princess Rhaenyra's bedchamber, they'd probably just die of shock, to not only find the robed prince standing at the foot of the said princess's bed but also witness the young, beautiful and thick-hipped daughter of the hand kneeling before him. Young Alicent Hightower, still dressed in her usual light blue dress, knelt before the Targaryen man and dutifully bobbed her head to and fro at his pelvis, swallowing his manhood with practiced ease, occasionally pulling out to place soft lips against the sturdy base of Naruto's shaft, laying delicatesse all the way to the angry crown. Schlup. Naruto most certainly did not mind the sounds she was making as she tended to his meat, evident from his groans of pleasure as he placed one encouraging hand on the girl's head and helped her with deep-throating him. Alicent moaned against the, tracing each vein and curve with her succulent lips, tasting every inch of his meat as her adventurous tongue came out to starting up the underside of the massive meat slab. Dear Lord, you are getting better and better with each session, the silver-haired prince groaned out, seeing the young maiden make a show of ing up from the base to the tip, making circles on the purple head of his with her tongue before going down slowly with half-lidded, full green eyes. It was utterly sinful for a young girl to have that much in such innocent eyes. Thank you, my prince, the Hightower maiden hummed softly, a sensually grateful smile on her delicate lips as she tongued the tiny hole atop the head, enjoying the sensation of his throbbing mushroom touching her tongue. The praise worked its charm, one hand running up the long shaft with tenderness while the other remained focused on its task of gently fondling the cum tanks. Alicent took to wrapping around Naruto's head, ing the throbbing head into her. Damn, now that's a new move. Naruto almost snarled throatily, feeling his self-control losing a battle against the pleasure as the young girl continued to law on the head of his meat like her very life depended on it. Sounds of slurping coming out of the room could easily be associated with the telltale signs of carnal depravity, especially when coupled with muffled moans of a female and the beastly grunts of a male as they lost themselves in pleasure. Alicent could not be stopped as she started taking more than just the head into her, taking an extra inch with each bobbing motion as she sped up. She knew the prince was close. She could feel it from the throbbing of his within her, the churning of his balls in her palm and the fact that his hand was practically forcing her to take him even deeper. Get ready, girl. Naruto was in a world of his own, eyes in a haze and teeth clenched as he held onto her head while she devotedly deep-throated his. The telltale, Quelching noises of a young gullet being stuffed by a girthy echoed across the room as the silver-haired Targaryen grunted one last time and forced the girls on his meat, stuffing down every inch down her throat as his meat throbbed. Swallow it all. Tossing back his head and roaring like the beast he was, Naruto felt the shaft of his dong expand as a stream of thick goo rushed out of his head and splurted down the girl's stomach, holding onto Alicent's head as thick ropes of nut poured out from his schlong. Smile for me, Alicent, the silverhead growled huskily as he pulled out his sputtering from within her gullet and aimed it straight at her face. Spurt, spurt, spurt. Well aware of what the prince needed and all too familiar with his antics, Alicent quickly gathered her scattered, drowned thoughts and leaned back her head to allow the prince's final round of sperm to splatter freely against her reddened cheeks, painting her face white in thick cream. Mind now relaxed in post-nut clarity, Naruto smiled amusingly as the young Hightower made an ed his softening meat completely cleaned and stuffed it back into his black hakama in a smooth movement, like she had done this a few hundred times already. She really had. You are a dear as always, Alicent. Is it too much to ask some patience of you horndogs whilst I try to find ways to sneak past the septa and join you? Hearing the annoyed voice laced with some amusement from the entrance of the chamber, Naruto offered a napkin to the red-headed girl to clean her eyes and sat on the edge of the bed with a grin as he turned to the door. Passion cannot be delayed, my dear niece, only stoked to reach greater heights, the Blackfire wielder answered with a smirk, seeing the familiar visage of his niece, the only alive heir of his brother and sister. Yes, greater heights indeed, uncle. I can barely see poor Alicent's defining features under all that white. The young princess bit back with a lopsided frown as she sashayed into the room in a naturally seductive stride. Rhaenyra Targaryen was a young girl of 17, a pretty little doll who was considered, by all accounts, a ripe apple for every highborn bachelor and not because she was a princess. Long, silky blondish silver hair done in an ornate freely loose style over her back, the young heiress was dressed befitting her station as the princess, favoring purple and maroon velvets and golden Myrish lace in intricate patterns. The cups of her form-fitting but still modest dress bulging outwards hinted at the delicious amount of teenage tit-flesh futilely hiding behind them. Slender waist and wide, flaring hips were her most defining features. She was the kind one would consider a late bloomer within the Targaryen family, as she lacked both the and the rear befitting of a dragon's descendants. Fortunately enough, she had much wider and shapely hips than all of them, and a cute, bubble butt. Not as developed as Alicent since both were almost of the same age, but she was still growing, and to be honest, her petite but still thick at the hips form made her a delicacy to his eyes. You are leaving. The princess made a displeased sound as she was met in the middle by her tall uncle. I came to find you before I left, but Lady Alicent was here already, the prince started in a low, throaty whisper as he grabbed the blushingly smiling princess by her wide hip, grinding his groin against her stomach. As you can see, we decided to make use of the time in a productive manner. I certainly hope there is more of that productive energy left for me. Comma, 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 I cannot see you but I do hear you too-ing, Alicent added from the foot of the bed as she tried to wipe her eyes clean from the hot cum. She wiped one clean just in time to see the uncle and niecing like lovers, Naruto leaning down to lock lips with the much shorter princess while fondling her butt. I've some unfinished business to attend to, the rogue prince whispered huskily, giving one last squeeze to the pert cheeks before letting go of Rhaenyra as he moved for the door. I do believe Lady Alicent is in need of thorough cleaning. The young princess did not need a second word to know what he meant as she smiled widely, winking at her uncle before she approached the red-headed maiden with a foxy grin. Rhaenyra what? Wait, OMMPPH. Chuckling at the sounds behind the closed door, Naruto straightened his coat and strolled across the corridor, Alicent's moans of pleasure echoing across the stony walls as she was attacked by the princessing for her uncle's cream. Life in King's Landing went on as always, except it was more bustling now than ever. The heirs tournament had attracted nobles and small folk alike from every corner of the realm to the capital to be a part of history. A heavily pregnant Queen Emma did not feel the same energy as everyone. How could she? They were about to start celebrating the birth of someone who may not be when everything was done. The maesters had only predicted the time, not the gender. It was her foolish brother, husband, Viserys' belief that the baby in her belly was male. His heir. She of all people hoped that it was so she could finally be rid of this curse that had plagued her womb for years. Stillborns had been her fate since her marriage. Only Rhaenyra had survived, though only she knew why. She could not bear any more children, or rather she did not want to bear any more children. She had cried over enough dead children for a lifetime. Careful with those frowns, sister. Any more of those and you'll be moving about in court with quite a few wrinkles. The familiar voice of her twin brother reverberated across the room as he entered with a beaming smile. Brother, Emma. The silver-haired Targaryen leaned down and captured his sister's lips in a gentle, tasting the sweetness of her delicate lips, moving upwards to her forehead, as he kneeled beside her lounging chair and placed a hand on her swollen belly. How is the babe? The busty queen chuckled weakly as she gripped her brother's hand and squeezed Lee. Too eager to get out. Adventurous, just like their mother, he countered softly. Somewhat less adventurous these few years. The hurt in her tone was too evident, even if she tried to cover it up with a beautiful smile. Times like these were when he hated his older brother for what he put their sister through in his obsessive quest to have a male heir. This bed is not where you belong, sister. The silver-haired queen flashed him a seductive smile. Of course, I belong in your bed. You should have never been cursed with this responsibility. You belong in the free world, on Dragonback, with me, the commander of the city watch muttered softly, letting his feeling come out for the first time in a while as he stared at his weak sister. We shared a womb, Emma, we belong to each other, you belong to me. The MILF queen wrapped her arms around the prince's head and hugged him to her belly, resting her cheek on his silvery locks with a fond smile. I've always been yours, Naruto, and I'll be damned before I let someone else take you away from me, especially not some silly vows. Yet it has kept us apart. Nothing keeps us apart, not even death. The kind-hearted queen spoke firmly, feeling the prince hug back her swollen belly as she smiled. Lay with me, Naruto, I want to try something. Raising an eyebrow at her sudden change of mood, the silver-haired prince did not have the heart to refuse his twin as he followed her instructions and laid the wide couch, dubbed by Emma as the pregnancy bed. Said MILF was already sitting on one side of the bed as he laid on his back and waited for the pregnant woman to continue. He laid against her shoulder, his centimeters away from her left, one arm loosely wrapped around her waist to support her and the other resting comfortably on the bump of her belly as she cradled his head against her large, pressing a pair of delicate lips to his forehead every so often. Besides Rhaenyra, I haven't had the pleasure to put my children to my teats and feed them like a mother would. The silver-haired queen started in a soft, motherly tone as she lowered his head back slightly and wobbled her incredibly fat breasts at his face, making the surprised prince lightheaded as his eyes focused on the breasts. Nurse on my teats, brother, drink your fill. The rogue prince could feel his throat parched up, tongue slithering out to wet dry lips as Emma hiked up her silver dress and a pair of massive, milk-filled jugs of pure flesh wobbled into the air. Have they gotten bigger than last time? His violet eyes were staring straight into the pink knobs of a massive tit, dangling in front of his without being affected by the gravity in the slightest. The meaty breast was wobbling in erotic claps with each breath as it neared his, and before he could voice out his protests, his was full of the massive tit. Don't talk with your full, Emma purred seductively, moaning in pure bliss softly as the warm engulfed her sore. Now be a good boy, grab my tit and squeeze out your milk. The pregnant MILF shivered in delight as two calloused hands possessively grabbed her fat breasts and squeezed firmly, feeling a rush of fresh milk stream out of her sore meat bags into his awaiting as her eyes fared from. Her breasts were producing milk like those of a well-bred cow. She needed someone to her udders dry to get rid of the itching and sensitivity. A mere touch to on the tip of her knobs was enough to get her weak in the knees. Look at me, baby, look me straight in the eyes whilst you feed. She spoke softly, almost a melodious whisper as if not wanting to disrupt the way he was laying at her. Naruto was all too happy to do as he was told and felt himself relax, lips curling up into a smile around the fat breast as he had harder. Emma giggled at his lecherous grin and ran delicate fingers through his silvery locks, whispering, muttering and cooing sweet nothings every so often. Naruto would have felt offended by her treatment of him if his wasn't currently trying to the tit dry or his hands weren't so busy squeezing out fresh milk from her. Good boy, mama's right here, she cooed lovingly. Damn it, woman. Against the prince's indignant expression, the MILF continued with her own mantra, continuing to run fingers through his hair and stroking his cheek lovingly. Using her free hand to lift up his shirt slightly, exposing rock-hard stomach as she began to rub gentle circles across the abs. The MILF was snapped out of her motherly trance as her brother let go of her breast with a wet pop, a dribble of milk spilling down his chin. "Had enough, baby boy." The robed prince deadpanned indignantly, wiping the dribbling milk with a hand. "You enjoyed this more than you should, Emma. I suppose I should return the favor then." The still dazed queen whispered sultrily, violet eyes more full than ever. "Time to give me your milk." "My milk, yes." One brief look into his eyes and the silverette understood what was needed to be done. Emma made herself comfortable on the wide sofa bed and leaned against the backrest, gesturing to her with a naughty smile. Grinning like a beast, the commander moved like a controlled puppet and approached the pregnant MILF, straddling her thick form and leveling his crotch with her. "Do not sit on my brother," Emma commented with a soft giggle, stopping the man from shoving his erect into her with a hand on his pelvis. "Breathing with your in my is hard enough as it is. I don't want to have my caved in under your weight." The pregnant MILF chuckled inwardly as her brother groaned in resignation and drove his hips forward, parting her lips by the crown of his and sliding inside with a soft groan. 2 days later, Stadium, King's Landing. Cheers of encouragement swept across the stadium as knights after knights entered the arena with their own entourage, flying the banners of their respective houses. Nobles, traders, and small folk alike watched in awe as the combatants tried their level best to unhorse one another in a fierce competition under the clear sky. Esser Kristen Cole of the Stormlands, a common-born lad and the son of a steward, was dominating the game as he swept through the competition with ease, bringing down one after another. The crowd was all happier for it. Gold dragons were betted on, lost or won left and right between the audiences. It seemed like he could not be stopped. Until Naruto Targaryen of Dragonstone will now choose his opponent. Until the prince of the city rode into the arena with his black mount, dressed in an armor unlike what was known in Westeros. A combination of steel and some kind of glowing, segments of steel-like portions decorated all over the black and red armor, with a great engraving of the Targaryen symbol on the helmet, keeping everything hidden behind the blackness of the steel, was that of a glaring dragon head, strange protrusions and extensions starting from the faceplate up to the head and forming a strange crown-like pair of horns. Rhaenyra and Alicent bit their lips in hunger as the object of their appeared in all his potent, dominating glory, cutting the image of a demon in human flesh. The wetness between their legs could be easily excused, especially for the Targaryen females as power attracted them, primely. A drop-dead silence reigned over the arena as he galloped in and stopped before a line of opponents. Even Viserys felt his swell up in pride as his brother approached the arena. Otto, seated beside the king, felt a light frown appear on his face as the silver-haired prince gave him a look from behind the helm and chose his eldest son, Gwayne Hightower, to be his opponent. For his first opponent, Prince Naruto chooses Esser Gwayne of House Hightower, eldest son of the Hand of the King. Cheer erupted from the crowd as Knight bowed before the podium, still mounted on his horse before he moved opposite to the Targaryen prince. Alicent could see the deep frown on her father's face as he looked at the armored prince like trying to burn him with his gaze. Everyone knew of the prince's strength, especially her father. They knew that Naruto had purposely chosen the Hand's son to humiliate the former. Viserys shook his head in resignation. He would never understand his brother's mischievous nature. Bets were made all over the place as the two rushed at each other, wooden lances at the ready and shields poised to defend. A gasp went through the crowd as Naruto, in a shocking show of skill, stood on the back of his black stallion and backflipped to avoid a jabbing lance to his before he hit the knight on the neck, sending him tumbling from his horse. Esser Gwayne Hightower was down. The victorious prince stood before the podium, reaching for his helm, as he gazed at the occupants one by one, giving Otto a smug smirk, much to the man's anger. Rhaenyra was quick to approach the rails and bend over the cold steel to give her handsome uncle a hungry smirk, biting her lower lip as her eyes fell on the purple eyes of cold power adored by a stray reddish-silver lock of hair. "Quite the performance, uncle. You cost me 5 gold dragons." "Betting on the losing side will do that to you, princess." Oh, how she loved that lopsided smirk of his. It made her wet between her legs. She knew to whom it was directed at, but the smirk was enough to have her dripping at her virgin core. "Lady Alicent, looking as ravishing as always," Naruto commented as the young, Thick Hightower heiress stood beside the princess in her bluish-white clinging to her still budding breasts and taut stomach, flaring to accommodate her wide hips. Prime for breeding, do me the honor of bestowing me with your favor. While it was said in a rather simple and polite way, anyone who had been with the prince knew what that tone meant. It was a demand, simple and straight. Alicent almost whimpered in arousal as she looked at the smirking prince and moved to grab a flowery ringlet from the table. She ignored her father's searing gaze. Sliding the ringlet down his lance, oh God, it made her want to slide down on his lance so much. Good luck, my prince. An hour later, Red Keep. Viserys looked at his sister, wife in trepidation as she howled and writhed in pain, dressed in her maternity dress. He had never seen her in so much pain. What's happening? The Grand Maester was quick to approach the king, gesturing for the servants to tend to the queen while he addressed the king. The infant is in breach, your grace, all attempts to turn the baby have failed. Another scream echoed across the chamber as Emma screamed in pain. Viserys winced. Can't you do something for her pain at least? The old maester shook his head solemnly. We've given her as much milk of the poppy as we could without risking the child. Emma. Viserys rushed to her side as she screamed louder, almost like she was having her soul ripped from her body before she slumped lifeless against the pillows. The king looked anxiously at the nurses and the mellows. Not to worry, your grace, she has just fallen unconscious. There she lay, his pregnant wife and sister, unconscious from the agony of labor while he stood beside her bed and looked down at her. Seeing her covered in her own sweat, beautiful face twisted in pain and barely clutching to life itself was almost heartbreaking to watch. Guilt overtook him as a much darker side of him blamed her for denying him the air he so desperately needed. He wasn't allowed to dwell much further on his dark thoughts as Mellows coughed into his hand, gaining the attention of the king. Your grace, as the father, I believe it's your responsibility to make an impossible choice considering the situation at hand. Speak, to sacrifice one or lose both. That garnered the distraught king's attention as he stood up and neared the old maester. Speak plainly, Grand Maester. There is a chance that we can still save the baby, through a rather gruesome technique. To cut directly into the womb and retrieve the child, but the resulting blood loss will. There was a chance to save his heir. She could still give him his heir. Yes, the nagging thought that he was basically condemning his sister to an agonizing experience which might even kill her was strong, but his desire for an heir was stronger. You can save my heir. If we act fast, if anybody harmed my sister, I'll personally see to it that Hyperion devours every organ while he breathes. The coldness, the sheer malice in the tone of the voice was enough to freeze the entire room as the armored form of the robed prince stood in the doorway of the chamber, having heard the entire conversation if the naked sword in his hand was any indication. Naruto. Viserys muttered anxiously, knowing full well what incurring the Silveret's wrath would bring upon him. Dark sister still unsheathed and flashing in the light of the chamber, the prince advanced on his brother, cold, furious eyes hidden behind his draconian helm as he grabbed the king by his collar. What are you doing, brother? My son, your nephew, can be saved, brother, Viserys started in a hopeful tone, trying to reason with his furious sibling. Your obsession with a male heir goes too far. But my heir. You are condemning our sister and your wife to death, Viserys. Are you that blinded by your obsession that you can't see beyond? Naruto. Shoving his brother to the chair behind him and giving the old maester a searing look, Naruto rushed to his sister's side just as she stirred awake from her painful slumber, voice weak and fragile as her tired eyes shifted towards her twin. I am here, Emma. I promise I won't let anyone even harm a hair on your body. The prince gripped his twin's weak hand and edged her forehead as she smiled diminutively, taking his hand and nuzzling it against her cheeks. All of you get out of here, except you. The older wet nurse, Jane, a blonde woman of around 40 years, nodded swiftly, not wanting to anger the prince more than he already was. She watched as the rest of the servants and nurses were glared into leaving the chamber, followed by a shaking Grand Maester as the prince almost threw his sword at him. Be brother, Viserys tried to start, eyes shadowed by his reddish-silver bangs and hands placed on his sister's pregnant belly and cheek. Naruto almost growled like a dragon. Viserys, get out of my sight before I forget that you are my brother and cut you down for conspiring to kill my sister. The king left promptly, under the neutral gaze of his wife as he left. Nurse. The elderly woman snapped into attention as the queen's contractions started once again and she writhed in pain, this time comforted by her brother as he gripped her hand and led her on the temple. Stay with me, Emma. As soon as you are done, I am taking you away from this shithole of a keep. The silver-haired prince muttered comfortingly, in her hand as she panted and groaned. Why you promise? She cried softly, tears streaming down her face as she tried to deal with the pain. I promise. Turning to the Jane, Naruto narrowed his eyes with a frown. Nurse, deliver the child without harming my sister and I'll reward you with whatever your heart's desires. Riches, lands and children to your heart's content. I'll do my best, my prince. The room turned cold soon as the prince's eyes almost flashed a demonic red. But should she be harmed, no force will stop me from destroying you and your future generations. Oh, of course, my prince. King's Landing. It was grim afternoon the next day, especially for the royal family. The heir did not survive, much to the anger and sadness of Viserys. The good news was that the queen had survived and was recovering in the bedchambers of her twin brother, guarded by his most loyal gold cloaks, even if several members of the small council had argued on the presence of the city watch within the walls of the keep. A glare from Naruto shut them up. Queen Emma was promptly moved to Naruto's bedchambers, all entry points sealed or guarded and only Jane, the elderly woman, allowed inside with the queen to take care of her needs. Even the food prepared for the queen was prepared within the room and served to the queen. Naruto had made it clear that he trusted no one with his sister's safety except the ones he knew would rather die than cross him. Viserys had been at the brunt end of the abuse. He had been refused a meeting with his own wife, even being threatened after he tried to use his authority as king to enter. He relented eventually. It was just a phase that their brother was going through. Turning his attention to the side, Viserys spotted his brother far away from the gathered crowd, standing on a distant hill like a statue. He could never understand his brother. On one side, Naruto had made it clear that he hated his guts for almost trying to kill their sister and had even threatened to slay him should he try entering into the chamber where Emma was. But here, after all that, he was still here, attending the funeral of his nephew. Granted he was standing far away from them, but the fact that he was there meant that he cared enough. Dracarys. The king looked away from the blast of fire shot at the bundle placed amidst a wooden fortress of logs and straws, courtesy of Rhaenyra's dragon, Syrax. The royal family and gathered nobles watched in glum silence as the fire raged on, burning the bundle within to ashes. With nothing but ashes left, Viserys staggered towards his carriage and turned to the hill just in time to watch his brother turn his back to the crowd and walk away, silvery locks blowing in the fierce wind. Naruto arrived at the castle late that evening, having walked all the way to the keep to ponder over some thoughts. The desolate hike through the hilly terrain and the darkness of the evening gave him enough peace to make a firm decision. Giving a firm nod to the royal guards stationed outside his door, Naruto entered the chamber silently, not wanting to disturb his sister. Shouldn't you be resting? The amusement in his voice was too clear as he walked in and closed the door, a wide grin flashing on his face as he looked at the scene before him. I am resting, Emma replied sultrily. The queen was seated in a wide chair near his work desk, as naked as the day she was born, bearing every little sinful curve of her deliciously thick Targaryen figure to the world while Jane, her wet nurse, knelt before her spread legs and ed at her core with the grace of her age. His meat stirred within the confines of his pants as his eyes fell upon the meaty, filled tanks of milk staying perky and staunch on her and thick MILF thighs opening to reveal the pink hole being serviced by the elderly woman. Come brother, join me, the busty queen purred in bliss. Jane here knows exactly how to use her. I can see that. When he had instructed the woman to tend to his sister's needs without any question, he hadn't exactly expected his sister to have her go down on her. This wasn't the first time he had found them like this. To think being freed from their brother had caused such a shift in Emma's personality and libido was a surprise. She had the poor woman between her legs within a few hours of her duty as the caretaker. He hadn't seen the woman properly while she had been delivering his nephew, but now that he really looked at her, he could appreciate the curves and endowments she had. While it was clear that Targaryens were gifted from a young age with curves and endowments, Jane was quite stacked by normal standards. Blessed with a meaty bust, some softness to her waist before flaring up to a pair of wide, birthing hips and a jutting behind that writhed in ecstasy as she moaned against his sister's cunt whiling it up. She was quite the specimen. Naruto joined his sister on the chair, ing her deep on the lips before he ran a hand on her still somewhat distended belly and looked at his sister. Emma patted Jane on the head and gestured for her brother's crotch with a smile. I think my dear brother could use some relief from that marvelous of yours. Jane was all too eager to reach for the hem of his pants before Naruto stopped her. No, it's my sister's weak to be spoiled. Plus I rather like that blissful look on her face while you work your magic. Emma bit her lips in arousal as Jane started ing her core again, and Naruto joined her by grabbing a hold of her fat breasts and popping a sensitive into his before he started ling like a hungry babe. She could get used to being spoiled like this. Wet hugged the meaty girth of his each time he went in deep, creating lewd squelching noises to symbolize the fiery passion between them until Naruto felt his orgasm building up, practically blurring his hips into his lover. Here it comes, my Saria, he growled like a beast, wrapping his lips around hers and proceeded to pour thick deluges of heavily potent sperm inside her waiting depths. His already fat shaft engorged and his balls started tensing up, sending every thick rope of seed it could into her ovulating uterus while they were standing up. Splurt, 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 yas. The black-haired woman squealed loudly into his, body quivering in delight as her tiny milked the prince for every last drop he could give her, Lee holding onto him as he filled her up while holding her petite form up like a doll. Sounds of moaning and grunting of men and women alike, squelching sounds of S sinking into eager, wet pussies and vividly clear sounds of spurting S unloading into open S echoed across the embracing lovers. They paid no mind to the carnal debauchery of the city watch engaged with the prostitutes all over the large chamber. The orgy continued on while the prince and his lover stayed standing in the center, thick sludge of sperm oozing down from between the woman's legs as the last drop was stuffed into her little cunt. I'm so full, you came so much inside, the petite woman purred as she carefully dismounted his waist and crawled away so that she could lie on her backside, positioning herself in a spread eagle position. Come and get your slut, my prince. How amusing. She wanted more even after he filled her to the brim. He knew what she needed right now. Placing himself just below her tiny waist and pert bubble buttocks, the silverette planted his feet around the sides of Mysaria's thighs as he picked up her lower half like she was Wadella's doll and squatted above her sperm-dripping core with a savage smile. Mysaria's eyes widened in realization as she recognized the position. Mating press. His diamond hard was forcefully pointed downward as he rolled up her ass from off the bed's surface, preparing to plow the beautiful woman in a full-blown mating press position. Looking down at his paramour, Naruto could not help but appreciate the allure of her petite and short form. Not blessed with much or other endowments like his other lovers, Mysaria was still alluring and able in a primal way as he looked down at her young figure. She had just the to fit his hands and enough bubble butt to provide some squeezing pleasure for his hands while he plowed her tiny, vice-grip cunt. Coming twice in one night and filling her live body with an absurd amount of cum that left her swollen even now. The black-haired woman could see just how hard the beast of a still was, dripping with their combined juices. She ran her tongue across her lips as she saw him bring down his mighty and press his pelvis against her waist from above, piercing her sloppy insides all over again as she felt the girth of his fat member sink down into her core all the way through her cervix in one go. Squelch. Ooh. My God. That's way deeper than before. She cried out, tossing back her head and shuddering intensely to the point her little breasts were bouncing around in a salacious manner. And no, not my womb. She looked a wide, shocked eyes as a long, tube-like protrusion bulged out across her stomach courtesy of the silverette continuing his trek down until he pushed into her bloated womb with a loud, wet sound, spurts of cum flying from the edges of the paramour's stuffed cunt as she was filled with meat. Aghhh. My womb. You are in my womb, my prince. Dainty little feet writhing in the air, ankles being held upright by Naruto's strong hands, Mysaria was lost in a world of her own as she realized that the prince was preparing to go all in on plowing her raw and making sure she was pregnant. He was planning to knock her up. Waiting for the dazed woman to recollect herself, Naruto basked in the bliss of his meat being parked right in the woman's tiny womb. Breed me, my dragon, put a bastard baby into my womb. These words were enough to awaken his animalistic instinct for baby making, coupled with the fact that she flashed him a full smile while full of his. The entire brothel stopped their debauchery to watch the draconian prince mating press his paramour and knock her up. "Wrong thing to say to a dragon, slut," he said with a savage smirk as he started pumping his pelvis downward, smacking his waist with her groin and letting his massive balls spank her pert ass while he rammed into her little cunt with raw slaps of flesh smacking against flesh echoed across the brothel, squelching sounds of Mysaria's being stretched and gaped by Horseworthy as he surrendered to his instincts and started eating her wildly without abandon. "Look at them go. That's breeding," one of the prostitute whimpered in wanton as she watched their warden being bred by the prince like she was a flesh sheath for his. "He is breeding our mistress like a broodmare." Unmindful of the hundreds of eyes on their nude forms, the road prince continued to rut into the squealing woman's cunt without a care, making Mysaria's legs to jostle helplessly into the air as he let go of them to press down on top of her even letting her wrap her hands around his neck. Agape, with a mystified look of intense pleasure written on her face, eyes half closed and small breasts shaking with the man's intense thrusts, Mysaria could feel every thick, throbbing inch of his pummeling the depths of her sperm-filled womb like never before. "Yes, pour your seed into my fertile womb and fatten me up with your babies, my prince." The black-haired paramour cried out sultrily, throwing back her head and huffing like in heat as she came around his length while her lover continued to plow her insides. With every cell within her slithering insides clutching and jerking his out of desperation for his seed, Naruto was hard-pressed not to blow his load, but he endured and kept a rampant assault into her tiny cunt. Keeping himself bent over her petite frame, Naruto brought his arms around her neck and his lips onto hers, embracing the orgasmic woman fully in a sinfully adulterous lip lock. Tongues meshed openly with each other as she felt another orgasm building up. She loved this aggressive passion he had, befitting of a dragon, as she continued swapping her lips around his while he pounded her insides thoroughly. "I'm Kuning," she cried out in ecstasy, shuddering with orgasmic relief as she felt her stuffed clamping down hard around Naruto's mighty before throwing her head back in a guttural scream of bliss. Body shuddering like possessed by a spirit, wet inside squeezing the man's meat with aggression, making him rut his pelvis into her body even faster till he felt the end come for him. "Take my seed, you slut!" Roaring like beast, Naruto pulled his throbbing out until only the head was still hugged by her before thrusting directly into her womb, cementing the neck of his against her cervix before letting loose. His orange-sized balls throbbed and his pulsated as it loudly fired thick ropes of sperm, spewing directly into Mysaria's already stuffed womb. Splurt, 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 splurt. The gathered crowd of prostitutes and city watch could feel heat running up their bodies and cheeks reddening in arousal, pussies dripping wet and hardening again, as the loud sounds of Mysaria's being filled with thick Targaryen batter echoed across the room. The mistress of the brothel clung onto Naruto's shoulders, fingers digging into his skin, an ahegao smile on her face as she felt the splurge of cum filling up her womb, drowning out her uterus, and making her stomach expand as he emptied his balls into her. Not as energetic as the prince, the black-haired paramour could feel her body tire out, her limbs going lifeless underneath him as she breathed heavily with a smile on her face and strands of black hair clinging to her forehead. Feeling himself finally go soft within her milking, albeit just barely, the silver-haired prince pulled out with a groan and got off the bed, admiring his handiwork with a smirk. A thick sludge of gooey cum started to ooze out from within her gaping folds when he pulled out. "Let us celebrate this momentous occasion with a toast to the king's son, the heir for a day," Naruto announced with a smug grin, cheers erupting from the crowd as they laughed with him. "Drink, and to your heart's content." Another cheer erupted as they descended back into their depravity. "Well, it seems my little protege is eager to serve you," Mysaria muttered with a loving smile on her face, a hand caressing the surface of her formerly flat stomach while the sperm continued leaking out of her non-stop while looking at young girl of about 15 standing to the side and looking at the princess with a wide, hungry look. "Come here, Mira, and service your future king." The prince grinned in appreciation as the pretty little thing, a young girl with budding breasts and the signs of womanhood appearing on her form as she approached him, little virgin dripping juices. "Kneel." He didn't even need to tell her what to do next as she grabbed his wet meat rod with one hand before joining it with the other as the first tiny hand proved to be too small to wrap around the girth before she started eating his meat. "She likes you already," Mysaria purred seductively as the little girl eagerly ate and slobbered over the princess which was still wet in their combined cream. Naruto groaned lightly as he placed a hand on the tiny girl and urged her to take his in, groaning like a beast as her little struggled to take the head in before he forced it in and the rest of the shaft followed while she continued to gag and choke. I'm going to need her to be my little from now on. Throne room, Red Keep, King's Landing. The reports had to wrong. It couldn't be true, could it? His own brother wouldn't disrespect the last memories of his son in such filthy company, would he? Why would he? On one side, he had Otto Hightower with very compelling evidence to support his outrageous report. He had never known the man to lie about his information. He wouldn't have been in the service of his grandfather if he had been known to be a fraud. On the other hand, he had such accusations against the brother, who despite being cold and ruthless to everyone, had defended him and stood by his family against all odds. He had no choice but to confront his brother and make a decision. Either way, someone was going to be expelled from his court by the end of this meeting, either Otto or Naruto. Garbed in the attire of the royalty and befitting that of his station as the king, Viserys sat on the throne, straight and strong, eyes cold as the doors to the throne room opened and the familiar visage of his tall, towering beast of a little brother appeared over the stairs. His eyes could only widen slightly and the grip on his sword in as he observed his brother enter in his armor, the armor that was the subject of tales and whispers among the men and women of the realm, especially the draconian helmet. Fortunately, the helm was tucked away under his arm, Blackfire and Dark Sister strapped to his back in a crisscross manner as he approached the throne with a neutral expression. Brother. The elder Targaryen brother was tempted to comment on the state of his preparation, to ask if he was going into war with someone, or maybe even expecting a battle with his brother in the throne room. But the word, heir for a day, echoed across his mind and he couldn't keep his emotions in check. Within these walls, I am not your brother but your king and you, Naruto Targaryen, will address me as such. Quote. Did you say it? Naruto raised an eyebrow. Say what? Viserys gritted his teeth in anger, his command ignored. The heir for a day, did you say it? The king knew he had grabbed onto a direct choke point on the silverette. Naruto never lied, period. To say Viserys himself was anxious to hear the answer would be an understatement. He desperately wanted to hear. No, to know that his little brother wasn't the heartless beast that the realm thought him as and to rub it in Otto's face for accusing his family. I did, Viserys' heart sank low, slumping against the jagged throne in shock, eyes staring into the emotionless expression on his brother's face as he gripped his sword. How could he? All this time, I defended you in court, gave you everything your heart desired, turned a blind eye on your blunders. For this, to see you disrespect the memory of my stillborn son, to see you celebrate with your whores and assers while my family is destroyed. Who, pray tell, played a role in destroying said family? The robed prince asked flatly, not the least bit bothered by the outburst. Viserys growled, you dare imply such filthy accusations. He knew what the silverette meant by that. It seems his brother had still not forgiven him for what had happened a few days ago. I merely asked a question. Your guilt played the role perfectly by taking it personally because deep down, you know what you had planned was wrong. Hyperion's rider explained in an idle tone, eyes staring at the enraged visage of his brother like staring at a stranger. Can you really blame me for not giving a flying about your son when you had no regard for my sister's life? The king shot up from his throne, causing the king's guards to unsheathe their swords in response as they pointed at the prince. You dare speak to me in that tone? I am your king. For me, family always comes first and all those circumstances have seen to it that we don't see eye to eye. I do love you as a brother but, the armored Targaryen had no reaction to his outburst. You're weak, Viserys, right down to your bones, unfit for the throne you so carelessly sit upon. Harsh it may sound, but it's the cold truth. Had I not promised our grandfather to support you in your quest, I would have left this god-forsaken continent a long time ago. He tried to respond. Viserys truly tried but nothing came out. Words stuck in his throat as for the first time in years, his little brother spoke what was truly on his mind regarding him. I have decided to take Emma back to Dragonstone where she belongs. I trust you had all questions and grievances answered the last time you two spoke. The demon prince continued undeterred, eyes and tone as cold as the steel of his twin swords. I wish you all the best in your endeavors, brother. Truly I wish we hadn't been so estranged. Donning the demonic helm on his head, Viserys truly felt like he lost his little brother as the strange steel of the helmet reflected no emotions of what Naruto was feeling under there. His heart twisted and throbbed in pain as Naruto walked away. I have chosen another heir. It was a last-ditched effort to gain his attention, to appeal to his interest in power. Both knew it. Even the Kingsguards felt bad for the elderly king as their ears registered the hurt, anger and anxiety in his shout. Naruto stopped for the briefest of moments, the silvery locks of his hair visible at the back and draping over his gold cloak before he started moving again, waving his hand. Good luck to Rhaenyra then. This is goodbye for now, brother. I reckon we won't be seeing each other for quite some time. I might return when you have sired a new heir. I hear there is a rush of marriage proposals. With a heavy heart, Viserys watched his little brother walk away from the throne room, not even turning around for a second. He walked away from his family, from his birthright, from his brother as if it was nothing. Had he truly lost him? Hyperion's lair, having overseen the transport of his 2,000 City Watch soldiers on to transport vassals and ships, loading them with bread and wine for the journey ahead and sending them on their way to Dragonstone, Naruto waited in front of the lair with a neutral look on his face. It was hard to leave his family behind like this, especially Rhaenyra, his cousin Rhaenys and brother, but if he guessed the upcoming events correctly, it was safe to assume that he would need to get his most loved ones to a safe place. Rhaenys could not go with him because Kerlise was still in court, and despite the relationship he had with his busty cousin, she was still married to the sea snake and bound to him. Their last union was the most passionate ever, and despite her advancing age, he couldn't help but hope that she was pregnant with his child. Rhaenyra was the heir to the Iron Throne, if he had to guess from his brother's announcement in the throne room today, and thus she could not come even if she was adamant to come. He had to convince her otherwise, even that with a promise that he and her mother would visit when they could. Alicent had merely watched him leave, giving him those helpless, green eyes full of hope, love and adoration with a hint of wetness to them as he said his goodbyes. As for his brother, he had allowed his twin sister to meet him one last time and announce their separation. It had shocked Viserys for sure, but he had wanted to avoid harming his brother in the future in retaliation for harming his twin had they remained together. Brother. Naruto was quick to approach the carriage his twin sister had arrived in, guarded by several soldiers, as he assisted the still recovering former queen down the carriage stairs. Emma. The guards looked away with a snap as the twins embraced and ed like lovers. So where is Grumbles? The silver-haired MILF asked in a sly, mirthful tone as her brother guided her to the cave entrance with a hand wrapped around her waist and another gripping her hand. Naruto chuckled. You know he hates that nickname. Which makes it all the more fun. You are lucky he likes you, the Rogue Prince countered with an amused grin. Hyperion, you ready? The City Watch guards were quick to dismiss themselves as the cave shook violently and a massive head emerged out of the entrance. If the head was massive, the body following said head was simply ginormous as the dragon gracefully walked out of the cave and nuzzled the former queen with a fong tinge of glint to his eyes. Hello Grumbles. Emma greeted with a soft smile, giggling into her hand as the gigantic beast released a puff of breath onto her and sent her hair and clothes flapping in a show of annoyance before turning to an amused Naruto. Try as I might, I cannot get used to the emotions he shows. Such an intelligent giant. Don't stroke his ego, the silver-haired prince retorted with a grin as the dragon glared at him. There is enough of that already. She did not need to tell him just how intelligent and magnificent this beast was. That faithful day was as fresh in his mind as the events of today. Flashback. Sitting on a flat boulder 100 or so feet away from a ginormous creature that inhabited a surprisingly wide cave center, the rogue prince eyed the crimson dragon, purple eyes fixated on the creature's nonchalant expression as it ate what looked to be several boatloads of fish and mutton. So he was responsible for destroying hundreds of villages across the shores of the narrow sea after awakening. Surprisingly enough, according to the reports, it only attacked when he sensed hostile intentions. Eyeing the massive beast, Naruto realized just how wrong some of the ideals of his family truly were. Any dragon beyond their control was labeled as wild and dangerous. Why, these creatures had as much right to freedom as any other. In fact, no dragon should submit to a human, especially when that human can be burned with a simple breath of fire from its maw. Any dragon that lowers its head before a creature a dozen times smaller than its size has no place in his heart. Certainly no respect. Valerian the Black Dread, for all his fearsome tales of savagery, was still but a leashed pet in his mind. A creature that magnificent bowed to his great predecessor. Why, the shadow of its body could hide an entire town, and yet it bowed and submitted to a mere human. It could have bonded with Aegon, understood each other, trusted each other, and then flown the skies. But no, a saddle was thrown on its back like a horse and rode across the skies. It burned when told, flew when ordered, and landed where it was told. Perhaps that is why he, as a child, never bonded with any dragon. He wanted a partner, not a pet. Someone who understand his thoughts and make a decision for itself, to sense and see for itself, to think for itself, and his rider, an intelligent creature. This beast had those qualities. Done with its meal and causing the searing cave to shudder as it growled in content, the massive dragon lightly stretched its wings over the stony cave and looked around its surroundings, looking for the strange smell within its domain. Naruto smiled in approval. There was intelligence behind those slitted red eyes, a presence, a thought process, and a scheming mind as they looked around, not with agitation or worry like a normal beast would, but with a nonchalance that even surprised the demon prince. "Greetings," the silver-haired Targaryen started in a soft voice, a lopsided smile flashing on the edge of his lips as he became the focus of the dragon's massive eyes, each eye twice his size as the creature neared to the edge. "Naruto Targaryen, truly a pleasure to meet you." Smile still flashing on his face, Naruto bore into the eyes of the beast without blinking or looking away. There was so many emotions he could see in the dragon's eyes. What a wonderful creature this was. It was neither angry nor surprised, more like a mix of annoyed and disappointed as he looked down at his tiny form compared to his size. He liked this dragon already. "Not much a talker, are you?" "Grr." His grin widened as the beast released a soft, guttural grumble from within the departments of its throat before moving its head away, finding nothing of interest in him apparently as it moved to rest. "It's rude to ignore your guest." The dragon turned its attention to the sight of the tall Targaryen sitting on the boulder with that calm smile of his, a curiously enigmatic look. "Grr, so you can understand me," Naruto stated idly, looking at the massive beast without a hint of worry. "I know that look in your eyes, beast. I've been around dragons my entire life, but you are different than your kind." Naruto noted with a certain amount of glee when the beast narrowed its eyes in curiosity. "You have intelligent eyes, eyes that appear to have seen more than others, almost as if you were there when it all ended, the doom of Valyria." It was then Naruto realized something. Whichever word from his sentence it was, but the dragon snapped open its eyes and instantly narrowed into Ager before it raised its head. Something ced in its mind. Something traumatic from the looks of it. An ominous force soon shrouded the cave in its almost tangible potency, causing the rogue prince to stand on his feet and watch the gigantic dragon. Body more rigid in defense and eyes focused on the beast, Naruto could feel the weight of the dragon's energy forcing down on his shoulders while he observed it reared its head. White-hot crimson flames engulfed the cave within seconds as the dragon roared and unleashed all hell on him. The dragon's eyes flashed a deep crimson as it roared out its flames in a destructive stream, the pressurized force incinerating everything and everyone in its path into nothingness, especially the human that had bothered its sleep. Except the human was there, standing unharmed and strong after the smoke cleared. Naruto looked down at his hands in shock, eyes wide in disbelief as he found himself still intact after the flames washed over everything. End of flashback. Still no saddle. The busty MILF asked curiously. "Brother, you should know I do not approve of you flying Hyperion without proper safety. He is not a pet to be leashed or a horse to be saddled." Sister, Emma knew this was a sore subject for both the dragon and her brother. And neither was this her first time bringing it up. The answer was always the same. Naruto may be the only Targaryen or even the first dragon rider to fly the beast without a saddle. He was against it, vehemently comparing it to leashing the creature as a pet. Something about limiting their potential and weakening the bond between the rider and dragon. Seeing as how he has been riding Hyperion for years with no saddle, she was convinced that he was right, but as a sister, she still worried no matter how many times he said that he was safe with the beast. Especially when he was riding the giant while standing on its back. no matter how much it turned her on to see him in his armored glory riding into battle on Hyperion's back. She had to change the subject, as always. Well, my big strong brother can sit without any saddle, but I am afraid I cannot. She started in a smiling tone as she gently nudged her twin in the ribs with a delicate elbow. Unless you are just planning to get rid of me. Well, I cannot, on good conscience, ignore the needs of my queen, now can I? The wielder of the twin swords replied with a smile as he neared his sister to his body and looked into her amused eyes. My lap shall be there as your seat, my arms as straps to secure you and my to rest that beautiful little back on. Oh, you little charmer, the sensual MILF purred hotly, wrapping her arms around his neck with a lopsided smile. You just want to feel up your sister's butt, don't you? Well, that is a nice butt. Emma raised a delicate eyebrow. Just nice. Let me check, just to be sure. Naruto countered with a grin as he grabbed 2 handfuls of the massive rump, giving the soft cheeks a few experimental squeezes, a few wobbles for measure and a gentle slap at the end to conclude it all. I take back what I said, that is the most beautiful butt ever. The silver-haired MILF giggled into her hand, amused by his perverted grin as he tried to remove his hands from her butt. He word tried, his hands never left her fat cheeks. You're so corny, brother. But you love me anyway. That, I most certainly do. Your chariot awaits, my queen, the silverette started in a polite tone, offering a mock bow as he gestured for the dragon's back. Thank you, sir, Emma chuckled in amusement as she took her brother's hand and climbed the crimson back of the gentle beast, marveling at how small everything looked from above his back as the dragon stood on its legs and prepared to fly. Enjoy the view. The prince chuckled at her mischievous jab, knowing that he was ogling her perfect behind as she climbed the dragon. Why wouldn't he? King's Landing watched as Hyperion took to the skies in a mighty flap of his wings, causing gusts of destructive winds as he flew into the clouds and disappeared into the blue beyond, not to be seen for years. Soaring through the open sea, Naruto gazed at the red keep for the briefest of seconds, purple eyes focused on the topmost tower where his brother resided, knowing that he was watching from the window, before he turned ahead and hugged his sister Lee. Standing before his window, Viserys watched with a blank expression, a tear rolling down his cheek as Hyperion disappeared into the clouds, taking the last of his actual family away from his gaze and soul. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.